Again, it is going to be quite mild, highs of around 15, possibly even 16 Celsius. That rain then continues its way eastwards as we go through the end of the day Saturday, clearing eventually on Sunday, leaving a drier day for many.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
delicious.
mental?
Put your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Martin Daubney. Weekdays from 3 p.m.
Or they're trying to make it better, or they're trying to make it slower, a lot slower. Slower enough, in fact, for it to sufficiently allow the boats to start coming in to cause further political damage to Rishi Sunak.
Which it will do if it carries on.
Of course it will. And this is the Labour peers, the Lib Dem peers, and no doubt some of the Conservative wets, banding together, causing political damage to Rishi Sunak. And the longer it goes on, the worse it will be for the Conservative Party.
There's now a deadline on the Rwanda plan. It's got to start working this summer to have any electoral benefit for Rishi Sunak, because of course if the election is in November, by then the crossings will slow down. It's got to be up and running by about May or June, and then they'll take it from there.
Cool. And you have a crumb of comfort for us. Rishi Sunak met a Prime Minister.
Well, a crumb of comfort for those who want to stop the boats, certainly, or we'll get towards it. The PM today met Alexander De Croo, who's a Belgian Prime Minister. They've agreed a UK-Belgium law enforcement cooperation agreement. In short, that is a focus on surveillance and information, ultimately, which should help stop the boats. Not many boats make crossings from Belgium, but it's the kind of, they can hopefully use law enforcement. These are the kind of deals which Sir Keir Starmer's talking about. If he becomes Prime Minister, he'll do more of these deals with countries on the continent, and this shows that the Tory PM can do them too.
And there may be intelligence sharing of crime gangs that operate within Belgium. As you say, it's a much, much further distance, much more perilous across the North Sea. Very unlikely that people will be leaving in any great numbers from Belgium. But nevertheless, is this of note, or is it a token victory against the backdrop of domestic
loss?
loss?
It's interesting they can do it with Belgium and not do it with the European Union, because so far we've been told the returns agreements can't be agreed with individual countries because they've got the European Union to talk to. Maybe this deal can be mirrored with France, and that might help with better cooperation, because basically after Brexit we're a sovereign country. We have to work on some areas more closely with our European neighbours.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Good morning, it's 9:30 on Friday 16th of February. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with me, Ben Leo, and Pip Thompson.
People of Wellingborough have spoken for Britain. This is a stunning victory for the Labour Party and must send a message from Northamptonshire to Downing Street.
Well, that's Jen Kitching, Labour's new MP, celebrating her by-election overnight. Our political editor, Christopher Hope, brings you more.
A record collapse in Tory support here in Wellingborough caps a double by-election defeat for Rishi Sunak. Labour march on, and Reform UK do quite well too.
I think that we won the election on our own back by working hard and getting a good message out there to the voters of Kingswood.
And the pain didn't stop there for Rishi Sunak. Newly elected Labour MP Damien Egan there also overturned an 11,000 Tory majority to win the by-election in the constituency of Kingswood. Our reporter Jeff Moody is there.
Yeah, it's a dramatic night here in Kingswood and a dramatic morning too. The new MP has just left the park where he was gathered with all of his supporters and Labour activists who have been up over the last few weeks and months campaigning on the streets here. We'll have the full analysis of those figures a little later in the programme.
An encouraging night for Reform UK. In Kingswood, they had 10% of the vote and 13% in Wellingborough. Reform UK's leader, Richard Tice, says this is a sign of things to come.
It's not our job to help the Tory party. Our job is to put forward different policies that we believe, frankly, will save Britain.
A GMA exclusive, Prince Harry, the all-new interview on his life today with Meghan, how his father, the King, is doing, and on his passion, supporting wounded warriors. Tomorrow on Good Morning America.
And this one's going to cause a stir. Prince Harry set to discuss King Charles's cancer diagnosis later today in the US on Good Morning America.
Madeleine McCann's suspect Christian Bruckner has been seen for the first time in 4 years as he arrives handcuffed in court for the start of a sex assault trial in Germany.
And GB News presenter Nigel Farage threatens to scupper NatWest share sales unless there's a culture change in the wake of his debanking scandal. It comes on the morning the bank appointed Paul Thwaite as its permanent chief executive. And Nigel, he joins us later.
There were record high 4-week waits for a GP last year. Is the NHS broken? Do you struggle to see your doctor?
Yes, good morning. An absolutely jam-packed show for you this morning. By-elections, Nigel's on the show, Prince Harry causing a stir. It remains to be seen what he said exactly in that interview. Has he come to London, spent 40 minutes with his ill dad, and then rushed back to give a 2-3 hour interview with Good Morning America? Or did they just ask him the question and he, as he should have done, batted it off?
Yeah, what you saw there was the teaser. We know as much as you, but we are going to be analysing it. Let us know what you think about all our stories this morning. So much to get down into. So let's get your headlines first. Here you go with Sophia.
Thanks, Pip. Good morning. It's 9:33. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB Newsroom. Labour scored a double win in by-elections overnight, inflicting a devastating blow to the Conservative Party. Jen Kitchen snatched Wellingborough with 45.8% of the vote, the second largest by-election swing from Tory to Labour since the Second World War. The stunning result came just 2 hours after Labour's Damien Egan won Kingswood with just under 45%. It was a miserable night for the Tories, with the party now having lost more by-elections in a single parliament than any government since the 1960s. Labour's new MP for Wellingborough says it's clear that people want change.
I am delighted to be stood here as the newly elected Labour MP for Wellingborough. I am honoured that local people have placed their trust in me and the Labour Party under Keir Starmer. But I also know from the thousands of conversations I have had during this campaign how desperately people want change and a fresh start for our country. The people of Wellingborough have spoken for Britain. This is a stunning victory.
Meanwhile, the Reform UK party saw its best result yet in a by-election, grabbing 13% of the vote in Wellingborough. The party also secured more than 10% in Kingswood. Reform's Wellingborough candidate, Ben Habib, hailed the results as remarkable, but Conservative Party chairman Richard Holden said the party's failure to win more seats was disappointing. And Labour's new Kingswood MP was quick to blame what he called Rishi's recession for helping deal a double blow to the Tories. Damien Egan said that 14 years of Conservative government have sucked the hope out of the country. His comments come as official figures show the UK slipped into recession at the end of last year, with the economy shrinking 0.3% in December. And for the latest story, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now it's back to Pip and Ben.
Good morning, this is Britain's Newsroom. We've got plenty to talk about here today on GB News with Ben and Pip, and it is a disaster for the Tories as they suffer that double by-election defeat at the hands of Labour. In the last few moments, there has been a comment from the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, who says the circumstances surrounding the by-elections were, in his words, particularly challenging?
Yeah, it was a bloodbath last night. The Tories lost their majorities in Wellingborough and Kingswood, and it means the party suffered more by-election losses in a single parliament than any administration since the 1960s.
But the Reform Party gave a strong performance, securing its best-ever by-election result in Wellingborough. And their candidate, Ben Habib, spoke to GB News.
We've done really well. You know, look at Reform. Reform is an insurgency. It's a new business, isn't it? We started 3 years ago. 3 months ago, we did 5% in Tamworth, slightly less than that in Mid-Bedfordshire. Today, we've done 10% in Kingswood, where people were saying we were going to lose our deposit. We've done 13% here, which is more than our national polling. This is a staging post in the growth of Reform UK's recognition, in the growth of people's understanding of what we stand for.
Well, joining us now is our GB News political editor, Christopher Hope, who is in Wellingborough in Northamptonshire for us this morning. And our South West of England reporter, Jeff Moody, is in Kingswood in Gloucestershire. Chris, let's come to you first. Those comments that we're getting now from the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, saying the circumstances surrounding both by-elections were particularly challenging. What do you make of that reaction from the Prime Minister?
I mean, what else could he say? There's no surprise he's saying that. The PM didn't come here to campaign in Wellingborough. He didn't go to Kingswood and campaign. Both those by-elections were triggered for embarrassing reasons for the party. In Kingswood, the MP Chris Skidmore quit a seat that was being wound up and shut down at the next election 8 months early to seek a career outside of Parliament. Here in Wellingborough, Peter Bone, the long-serving Tory MP Brexiteer, was pushed out amid a degree of his concern about his private life. So these by-elections were not wanted by the Prime Minister, and that's what he means. That's why there was no real campaigning here at all. They weren't seen here. And now we can see why. A 28.5% swing to Labour. That's the second biggest on record behind Dudley in 1994. The biggest collapse in support ever for a Tory party. As you said there, the biggest run of by-election defeats in one parliament since the 1960s. It gets worse and worse. And the problem that the Tory party's got is its supporters are not getting out and voting. They're sitting on their hands almost in protest to what they see as how the government's been run, going back beyond Rishi Sunak. I mean, Mr Sunak has brought in a degree of stability in the last 2 years, but the memories run deep. The party's been in charge for 14 years. The concerns about cost of living crisis, mending roads. Jen Kitchen, the 28-year-old new Labour MP for Wellingborough, said earlier in her interviews that she's feeling a lot of calls about potholes. Why can't the government fix them? And she'll be picking up the cudgels on that on behalf of her new constituents. Even though that's actually not a government issue, it's a council issue. People here want to blame the government, and why shouldn't they? They're in charge, and that's part of the problem. Reform UK, though, Ben Habib there saying how well they're doing, a staging post, he said, didn't he? 13 points. They are now delivering on their national poll numbers locally. That's a big step forward. That party, as the Brexit party, didn't even fight the 2019 general election in Kingswood or Wellingborough, and they've gone from nothing to 10.1% in Kingswood and 13.4% here in Wellingborough. So they are doing well. The big challenge, I think, for the Tory party is how can they get the vote out at the general election. That's all that counts. They're banking on this idea that don't risk it all, don't risk a recovery by backing Starmer, stick with the Tory party. Well, right now, people here in Wellingborough are not doing that.
Chris, will Sir Keir Starmer be feeling a bit relieved this morning after what's been a fairly torrid week? He's been dealing with anti-Semitism rows, U-turns, of course, the latest on the £28 billion Green Pledge. Will he be thinking, you know, thank goodness for that?
Totally right, Ben. And it just shows to me, I think, how often we in Westminster get, we see a narrative, we exploit it, write about it, deal with it. Last week, the £28 billion U-turn on spending on green pledges in the back end of the first Parliament of a Labour government. This week, the ugly face of claims about anti-Semitism rising again in the Labour Party. That looked difficult for Sir Keir Starmer. I mean, they've had to suspend, they've withdrawn support from a candidate in a by-election coming up. But instead, here in Wellingborough, that didn't count for much because people are worried about other things too. And we see narratives I think in the bubble in Westminster, which out in the country aren't often seen that way. And I think that'll be a relief for Sir Keir Starmer. He, of course, is at the funeral today of Tony Wright, the former Rochdale MP. So he's not really out and about. He did some interviews earlier. But in terms of the big celebration, we're expecting a different cabinet minister here in Wellingborough shortly.
OK, Christopher Hope, thank you for bringing us the latest there from Wellingborough in Northamptonshire. Let's talk to Jeff Moody now, who is in Kingswood. Now, that was a 16.4% swing, Jeff. And what's interesting about people in Kingswood is that they've almost always voted for the party that has actually won power. That's been the case, I think, except for in 1992.
Yes, it has, exactly. It's very telling, isn't it? I think there are three things that we can take from this by-election if we want to look at those figures. First of all, it's the issues themselves. The voters on the streets and on the doorsteps have said the big issue is the cost of living crisis. That's what this was fought on, and that's what this has been won on from the Labour Party. But yes, that swing is very interesting, isn't it? The Conservative share of the vote fell from 56% at the 2019 general election to just 35% now. So they've lost 21%, whereas Labour has jumped from 33% to 45%. So a significant loss in support for the Conservatives, but not a massive rise in support for the Labour Party. That's very interesting. We've been saying this for weeks and months, haven't we, that people have lost faith in the Tories, but they haven't necessarily turned in their droves to Labour. And now the Labour share of the vote here is, although it's been a successful day for Labour, it's still significantly less than it was in 1997, significantly less than it was in 2001, and less than it was in 2005. And Sir Keir Starmer said some time ago, and he said continually over the last couple of years, if Labour is to win in any sizable, meaningful way later this year, they have to have a bigger swing than they had during 1997. That large swing hasn't happened here. So maybe that's a little sliver of good news for the Conservatives, but it's certainly only a tiny bit of good news because, yes, for Rishi Sunak, it's been a pretty devastating night, particularly looking at that rise in Reform. Now the third party here, the Liberal Democrats, lost their deposit. They're always regarded as the champions of the South West. They haven't done well here at all, but Reform has. If Reform hadn't fielded a candidate, and if everyone that voted Reform had voted Conservative instead, then we'd be talking in a very different story now. There would be a Conservative MP here, but they didn't. Reform is definitely eating into that right-wing vote, and it's causing huge headaches for Rishi Sunak this morning.
OK, Jeff Moody in Kingswood, appreciate your efforts, thank you. I also enjoy the Conservative optimism off the back of Wellingborough and Kingswood, so we'll remain to be see how they perform in the general election.
Let's take a listen to the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer. He's giving his first reaction to that double by-election win.
We're very pleased with the by-election results from last night. I think it's very clear that people are crying out for change across the country. They think that the Tories have failed. They can see that most things are broken. They look at the Labour Party and see a changed party. And last night, people who hadn't voted Labour before went out and voted Labour. So I'm very pleased with both of those results. But there is more work to do. There's a long way to go. And as every football fan knows, you don't win the league by a good result in February. So we've got to fight. Like we're 5 points behind in the polls, got to earn every vote as we go forward.
You may not be the whole way there, but does this make you confident, more confident, that you'll be the Prime Minister after the next election?
What I take from these by-elections is that repeatedly now voters are being clear with the government that they want change. We've seen not just these two by-elections but previous by-elections, the same basic message coming from the electorate. We're fed up, nothing's working, we want change. After 14 years The Tories can't provide that change because they failed. They look, therefore, to the Labour Party. They see a changed Labour Party that has got an answer to their issues, the cost of living crisis, the NHS, the broken public services, and they're prepared to put their vote behind the Labour Party. So that vindicates the hard work we've done in the last 4 years to change the Labour Party, now unrecognisable from the party that lost in 2019. But we've got to fight for every vote. We've got to make sure that we understand there's more work to be done, a long, long way to go.
And obviously, last night's results successful for you. Comes on the back of a difficult week. Does Labour still have a problem with anti-Semitism in the party?
Anti-Semitism must be fought wherever it is in every organisation. And I said, when I was elected Labour Party leader, the very first thing I said is that I would root anti-Semitism out by, take anti-Semitism out by its roots. And that's why I did something this week which no leader of the Labour Party has ever done before, which is to remove a candidate in the middle of a by-election, a Labour candidate in a Labour seat, when he couldn't be replaced. And that's on the back of other work I've done on this issue, because the fight is never over. But this Labour Party is a changed Labour Party from the party that fought in 2019.
So how confident are you then that there are no other candidates or prospective candidates that don't share the views of Mr. Allen?
I've put in place in the Labour Party a robust due process exercise for every single candidate. Every candidate goes through that process. Now, in this particular case, there was a private conversation that couldn't be picked up by due process. So I'm satisfied with our processes, but, you know, we must continue to fight anti-Semitism wherever we are, in organisations, in political parties. You've seen what happened with the Tory party earlier this week in relation to their mayor. See what's happened in relation to the BBC. All of us have a duty. The fight against anti-Semitism is never over. But I think anybody can look at the Labour Party now and not say that is a fundamentally different party to the party that lost in 2019. And the evidence, the best evidence of that, is that last night Tory voters in the past, never voted for the Labour Party before, came out and voted for the Labour Party because they can see that we've changed and they can see that we've got a plan that actually addresses the issues that they're facing on a daily basis.
OK, so that was the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, giving his reaction. We will be looking at that very shortly, but also more reaction coming in from the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, after those two by-election defeats. He is saying, which I think he said before, that a vote for anyone except the Conservatives is a vote for Sir Keir Starmer. We will bring you the very latest on all this and much more, including Christian Horner protesting his innocence in the face of allegations that he acted inappropriately towards a female colleague at Oracle Red Bull Racing.
You're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News. Stay with us.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria DiPiero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Farage, Monday to Thursday from 7 p.m.
Lots of people have different ideas, but principally a Conservative approach to getting growth is to reduce taxes so that people, ordinary people and businesses can spend more of their own money to invest and grow the economy.
So the theory is that you cut taxes and that then pumps more money into the economy.
Exactly right.
Growth.
And then people, you know, it's not government that are creating wealth. It's individuals, businessmen, companies that create wealth. It's the private sector that creates wealth, that the public sector then taxes and spends.
I get the theory, but one of the criticisms of you, and I think one of the criticisms actually of all political parties, is they appear to be incapable of cutting government spending.
That's the key. I mean, and I think when I look back, is that we should have had a credible plan to reduce the increase in spending. Now, that's often a difficult concept to explain.
But it's in line with inflation, etc.
That's all right. So when you're slowing the increase, it means, you know, one year you spend £100 and the next year you spend maybe £101 as opposed to going up to £110. So the actual level isn't going down, but you're slowing the increase. And that's very much what I tried to do. And actually, looking back, the one thing I wish I'd done, was to present a credible spending plan at the same time as the tax cuts that we announced.
You had a go, it didn't work out for whatever reason, and that analysis will go on for some years to come. We have Jeremy Hunt there as Chancellor now, hinting quite strongly now there won't be any tax cuts, but the truth of it is, under 14 years of Conservatives, for a variety of reasons, the tax burden has risen. That's right. To the highest since the Attlee government, way back in
80 years,
1951, whatever it is.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Welcome back. Let's get some sports news now from our man in the studio, Paul Coit. Now, a defiant Christian Horner from Red Bull Racing, the Formula One team, he is under pressure at the team to... well, there's been a complaint about him. The specifics aren't all there.
Inappropriate behaviour.
Inappropriate behaviour.
We know.
What does that mean? Horner, he's won 6 world titles with the team. Paul, what's going on at Red Bull?
Inappropriate and controlling behaviour. There's the controlling word in there as well. That's all that's being said. So this was a couple of weeks ago. A week ago, so last Friday, was the meeting with the independent lawyer that had happened. It was very carefully positioned as it's not a hearing, it's just a meeting. It went on for 8 hours, but the thing is, we're now getting towards the start of the season. So this is when the new cars will be released, and everybody's doing that, and Red Bull seem to have gone after everybody else. So
Christian Horner, he has spoken now.
Yes.
For the first time.
Well, he has, because the thing is, well, when the car comes out, and then you'd expect now, is Christian Horner being the principal, is he going to be there or isn't he? Now, you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't, so he was put in front of the press. The press were told, don't be asking those questions. You can ask about the car. And I know what you two would have done straight away, and they've done exactly that. So that everybody was asking the same questions. And these are the quotes. Yeah. Support, he said, the support is overwhelming. It's business as usual. It's actually, I mean, this is obviously very well rehearsed because he knew what was going to happen. They fully denies the allegations. This all brings the team together. So it's all quotes like that.
But he did call it a distraction, and the season starts in a few weeks in Bahrain, the Bahrain GP. You've got testing starting next week. You do think, why, for a team that's so successful, they won the championship last year, the World Drivers' Championship, and the Constructors in emphatic fashion. Why has this come out?
Now, this is where we start looking back at the business, and he was very close to the man that founded Red Bull, who's no longer with us, by the way, died about 18 months ago. Now, then you look at the power struggle within the company in Austria. Now, is there more at play, and what's the power when it comes to Red Bull Racing to go with Red Bull, the business?
Got it.
It's a lot more involved in this. He is a man with a lot of power. Maybe it's in our best interest if Christian Horner is moved out of the way. Obviously, you can't ignore the allegations, but it's very interesting that they came from Red Bull, and then we're going to see what happens. So I'm sure there's people that are within there that would like to see him elbowed.
Politics and scheming everywhere.
Oh, absolutely. It's what it sounds like.
Yeah. Great stuff. Thanks, Paul.
Pleasure.
Very soon we're going to be talking about Prince Harry. He has been asked on Morning Breakfast Show in America about his father's cancer diagnosis. What did he say? Stay with us.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, very good morning to you. Alex Berkill here with your latest GB News weather forecast. It's going to stay mild as we go through the next few days, and for most of us it's actually going to be quite dry today. Yes, there are a scattering of showers across parts of northern England, Wales, and also into Scotland, Northern Ireland, a few showers likely here. But across southern counties I'm expecting it to stay mostly dry today, and there will be some decent sunshine too. Like I said, it's pretty mild, although temperatures won't be quite as high as they were yesterday. they're still going to be several degrees above average for the time of year. Staying mostly dry as we go through the end of the day, still just a few outbreaks of rain here and there, but some clear skies for a time. A bit more cloud pushing into western areas as we go through the early hours of tomorrow, and that cloud may be thick enough for some outbreaks of drizzly rain. But in the east, some clearer skies, and as a result it may turn a bit fresher than some recent nights, but on the whole still relatively mild for the time of year. As we go through tomorrow then, the best chance of any sunshine will be early on across the far east, and then increasing amounts of cloud pushes in from the west. That will bring a bit of rain towards western parts through the morning, but it's later on where we see a band of heavier, more persistent rain sweeping its way eastwards across the country. Again, it is going to be quite mild, highs of around 15, possibly even 16 Celsius. That rain then continues its way eastwards as we go through the end of the day Saturday, clearing eventually on Sunday, leaving a drier day for many.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Britain's Newsroom, weekday mornings from 9:30.
Are you across this microaggression story?
I'm across microaggressions. I'm also across XL bullies.
You would not last 5 minutes.
Oh, for God's
So
sake,
basically-
civil servants, give me strength.
So civil servants have been taught not to roll their eyes. Something you do very well. We both do it quite a lot, actually.
Because it's seen as an act of microaggression. This, by the way, this costs the taxpayer, this
Yes.
training, £160,000. What the hell is going on in our woke civil service? Who cares if someone rolls their eyes in exasperation?
What the hell is going on in our civil service, full stop, if the way that civil servants are communicating with each other is rolling their eyes and looking at their phones? I mean, is the government being run by people who are essentially acting to each other like stroppy teenagers?
But I'm all right with people, because, you see, I would be in defence of eye rolling.
So me too, I couldn't care less.
But do you know why? Because I want people to give me their genuine reaction, as long as it's not deeply offensive. But I want to know how people feel. And what they're being told here, civil servants are being taught, and of course this is an area of employment law, because people are taking cases against their bosses who roll their eyes at them. They're saying they're being encouraged to say nothing and nod their heads to promote transparency and inclusion. Don't show what you really think, just nod your head.
But I think that comes with then saying what you really think, and this is the key problem, and what these courses are trying to establish. And I looked into some of them when I was researching this, and it's not saying hide what you're feeling. It's saying, rather than huffing and puffing and rolling your eyes, if you've got a disagreement with someone, say I've got a disagreement with someone. Because otherwise, you can't have an effective workplace if people are sort of just passively, aggressively huffing at each other.
Why do these civil servants need to be taught this? Why do people need to be taught this? This is just normal discourse in a normal working day. You don't need a seminar on it.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
A very good morning to you. It is 10 a.m. on Friday, the 16th of February. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Ben Leo and Pip Thompson.
People of Wellingborough have spoken for Britain. This is a stunning victory for the Labour Party and must send a message from Northamptonshire to Downing Street.
Yes, that was the new Labour MP for Wellingborough, Jen Kitchen, celebrating her election victory overnight. Our political editor, Christopher Hope, has more.
A record collapse in support here in Wellingborough caps a double by-election disaster for Rishi Sunak. Labour march on and Reform UK are doing well too.
I think that we won the election on our own back by working hard and getting a good message out there to the voters of Kingswood.
Yeah, the pain didn't stop there for Rishi Sunak. Newly elected Labour MP Damien Egan also overturned an 11,000 Tory majority to win the by-election in the constituency of Kingswood. Our reporter Jeff Moody is there.
Yes, the people of Kingswood have now woken up to the news that they have a Labour MP and that they've delivered a heavy blow to Rishi Sunak. But it's not just the Labour Party that's causing problems for the Conservatives here. I'll have a full report a bit later in the programme.
Yes, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is disappointed and said the circumstances are, quote, not ideal, you think? But Sir Keir Starmer praised the results as fantastic. Let's hear his first reaction to the news.
We're very pleased with the by-election results from last night. I think it's very clear that people are crying out for change across the country. They think that the Tories have failed. They can see that most things are broken.
Morning, a GMA exclusive. Prince Harry, the all-new interview on his life today with Meghan, how his father, the King, is doing, and on his passion supporting wounded warriors. Tomorrow on Good Morning America.
Prince Harry is set to discuss King Charles's cancer diagnosis. That's later in the US on Good Morning America. We bring you the latest here on GB News.
Yes, an absolute bloodbath for the Tories in the by-elections last night. Sir Keir Starmer, a man once dubbed the human bollard by Boris Johnson, he looked pretty bullish there this morning. And you have to say, he's going to be pretty relieved after what's been a torrid week of anti-Semitism claims, criticism for the U-turn on policies such as the £28 billion Green Pledge, and also this Prince Harry situation, Pip. Is he going to do what he should have done and bat away the questions about his dad's health, or has he spilled the beans?
Yeah, it is going to be interesting. We know as much as you, really, but we will be talking about it. That and much more to come. Let us know your views about everything. Thank you for the ones that have come in so far. Plenty of them, as you might expect. gbviews@gbnews.com. Your latest headlines now with Sophia Wensler.
Thanks, Pip. Good morning. It's 3 minutes past 10. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB Newsroom. Labour scored a double win in big by-elections overnight, inflicting devastating blow to the Conservative Party. Jen Kitchen snatched Wellingborough with 45.8% of the vote, the second largest by-election swing from Tory to Labour since the Second World War. The stunning result came just 2 hours after Labour's Damien Egan won Kingswood with just under 45%. It was a miserable night for the Tories, with the party now having lost more by-elections in a single parliament than any government since the 1960s. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer welcomed the results, but says the party will continue fighting.
We're very pleased with the by-election results from last night. I think it's very clear that people are crying out for change across the country. They think that the Tories have failed. They can see that most things are broken. They look at the Labour Party and see a changed party, and last night people who hadn't voted Labour before went out and voted Labour. So I'm very pleased with both of those results. But there is more work to do. There's a long way to go.
Meanwhile, the Reform UK party saw its best result yet in a by-election, grabbing 13% of the vote in Wellingborough. The party also secured more than 10% of the vote in Kingswood. Reform's Wellingborough candidate Ben Habib hailed the results as remarkable, while party leader Richard Tice told GB News it's proof that time is up for the Tories.
It's not our job to help the Tory party. Our job is to put forward different policies that we believe, frankly, will save Britain. I've been predicting the recession that was announced yesterday since the beginning of the year. I was right on that. You can't grow an economy with the burdens of record high taxes, record high wasteful government spending, mass low-skilled immigration and the vast cost of net zero. And I've been saying this, and sadly, I've been proven right. And that's the policies that we're going to put to the people with a completely different plan. And we say this is the only way you can grow the economy and get the country back on track.
But Conservative Party chairman Richard Holden poured cold water on Reform celebrations, saying the party's failure to win more seats was disappointing.
It's quite a disappointing result for Reform. You know, I always remember being back on the by-election campaigns with Reform's predecessor, UKIP, back in the 2010s. You know, when in Rochester or in Clacton, they were getting 45–50% of the vote in some of these by-elections, with with better turnouts than these ones.
And Labour's new Kingwood MP was quick to blame what he called Rishi's recession for helping to deal a double blow to the Tories. Damien Egan said that 14 years of Conservative government have sucked the hope out of the country. His comments came as official figures show the UK slipped into a recession at the end of last year, with the economy shrinking 0.3% in December. 2 boys, both aged 15, have been arrested on suspicion of murder after a teenager was stabbed in Bristol last night. The 16-year-old victim died in what police described as a sickening attack by 2 assailants who were allegedly wearing masks. It comes just weeks after the deaths of teenagers Mason Wrist and Max Dixon, who were also stabbed in Bristol. Police now have enhanced stop and search powers across the city as investigations continue. Around 700,000 households will start receiving a cost of living payment today. It's for those who receive tax credits and no other qualifying payments. More than 7 million eligible UK households have already received the £299 payment. It's the third of 3 payments, totalling up to £900. The money will be paid directly, and those eligible do not need to do anything to receive it. A spike in consumer spending has seen retail sales bouncing back after a dismal Christmas shopping period. January recorded the largest recovery in sales since April 2021, defying forecasts and suggesting Britain's economy may be on the mend, despite slipping into a recession in December. The strongest result was seen in food retailers, with sales increasing by nearly 3.5%. And the Duke and Duchess of Sussex are continuing their Canadian tour today. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle have been spending time with sporting champions in Whistler Village ahead of the Invictus Games. Despite controversy brewing over reports the Prince will discuss his father's health on US television today, Harry appeared to have fun with the athletes, despite the freezing temperatures. The Invictus Winter Games will take place in Vancouver next February. And for the latest story, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now it's back to Pip and Ben.
Welcome back. It's 8 minutes past 10. You're with Pip and Ben on Britain's Newsroom on GB News. Still to come in the show, do you struggle, I'm sure you do, to get a GP appointment? Well, you're not alone, as more than 17 million people had to wait more than a month to see a doctor last year, a record high. I want to know what part of that has got to play in our record excess deaths last year, and also, why is nobody linking mass migration to our ailing public services? We're going to have more on that in just a little bit.
But first, well, it's a bit of a disaster for the Tories, is it not, as they suffer a double by-election defeat at the hands of Labour.
Yes, they surrendered their majorities in Wellingborough and Kingswood, and it means the party has now suffered more by-election losses in a single parliament than any administration since the 1960s. Here's what the chairman of the Conservative Party, Richard Holden, told GB News a little earlier.
It's quite a disappointing result for Reform. You know, I always remember being back on the by-election campaigns with Reform's predecessor, UKIP, back in the 2010s. You know, when in Rochester or in Clacton, they were getting 45–50% of the vote in some of these by-elections, with with better turnouts than these ones. So I'd say on that, if you're polling 10% on a 35% turnout, I think and also the assumption you're making in your question is that everybody who voted for them came from the Conservative side of things. I'm not sure that's strictly true either. So disappointing results for us overnight.
Let's delve into this with the Deputy Editor of Conservative Home, Henry Hill, who is here in the studio. Henry, what are your overriding thoughts this morning?
Well, I think the first one is that this is a pure signal, no noise series of by-elections. When the Conservatives won that seat in Uxbridge and South Ruislip by a couple of hundred votes, I think it did far too much to muddy the narrative of how much damage the government was in. They were like, 1-1, lost one. Now, this is just two very solid defeats. I think Wellingborough is the heaviest Conservative by-election defeat since 1994. So it's very clear what the overall picture is, which is the Conservative Party is in real trouble. I think the second one, which I think we'll come on to, is I think some people are in danger of over-interpreting the Reform result. It was a very good result for them. They've finally shown they can post double-digit vote shares. But in seats that's one of which voted 60% leave, only to get a 10%, 11% vote share, I think, in a by-election conditions.
But the turnout was quite low, wasn't it?
Yeah, but vote share rather than the overall turnout, right? So that's a share of the people who did turn out.
Wasn't it the case in Wellingborough, though, that if all the Reform voters had gone to the Conservatives, they would have held the seat?
I think that's Kingswood of the two, but that is the case by about 3 votes, and I think it's a stretch to suggest that every single Reform voter would have gone to the Conservatives.
Well, Nigel Farage was making that point yesterday, saying in the case of certainly the Brexit Party and UKIP in 2015, when they won 4 million votes, the myth was, he said, that a lot of the UKIP votes came from the Conservatives, when in actual fact it was a lot of Labour Red Wall voters.
Yeah, I think UKIP was actually, because a lot of those Labour voters did end up voting Conservative in 2019, but I think actually what UKIP did was really interesting, is it gave them an opportunity to break the lifelong habit of voting Labour without having to go straight to the Tories, and it's easier to do that journey in 2 stages.
The Tories, though, they are in trouble.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of it. And they're losing votes now at both ends. They're losing the votes to Reform and they're losing the votes to Labour. And yet Rishi Sunak is trying to, it seems, bat away these results to some extent by saying, well, the circumstances of both by-elections were particularly challenging.
There are always individual circumstances in by-elections, right? There are always unique contests, and you do need to be slightly careful about how much you extrapolate from any one result. But the overall signal, as I said at the beginning, is perfectly clear. This is 2 thumping defeats on the back of a string of thumping defeats, which are entirely in line with the national polling. So, no, these by-elections do augur, I think, currently a very heavy defeat for the Conservative Party. It's understandable that the Prime Minister would want to play that down. He can barely just stand up there and go, you know what, guys, yeah, the jig's up. But
do you think it could change the timing of the general election now?
Potentially, not in and of itself. Basically, Rishi Sunak has said he wants to go long. There's lots of reasons for him personally to want to go long into October, November. For the party, it would be best that he goes in May, because he goes at the same time as the local elections. That saves a bunch of Tory councillors, and it also means that lots of Tory councillors and activists who may not be particularly enthused about Rishi Sunak will be out campaigning in their own patches anyway. So it might be that if things continue to get really bad, he looks at the summer and he thinks, maybe the Rwanda bill won't work, maybe there'll be another summer of crossings, maybe it would actually be sparing my blessings.
Also, Henry, you say for the sake of the party he might call an election in May, but what about for the sake of the country? Who wants a zombie government walking towards pretty much guaranteed electoral, defeat, absolute wipeout, when we could have a new government in to get the ball rolling, get their policies in play? They're just wasting time, aren't they? For the sake of the country, shouldn't they?
Well, I mean, every party does this, right? With the exception of when we had the fixed-term parliaments, like every party in government, the last parliament is always 5 years. Normally, you go after 4 years, and Major in '97, Brown in 2010, they all kind of just cling on a bit, because the party of government can scarcely say that the country would be better off with the opposition, right? Have an early election and say, oh yeah, no, I think it's time the other guy had a go. Like, that's politically impossible, but it is very tricky, because even with the best will in the world, there's now only about 6, 7, 8 months left. That's not time to deliver serious policy reform on any front.
What about what the Chancellor could deliver in the spring budget next month? There's been talk about he's now rowing back on this income tax cut. What nuggets, if any, can the Tories offer to voters?
Well, I mean, I think that's the key test. You were talking about if there's anything that could move the election forward. I think if Jeremy Hunt managed to come up with something in this quite early budget that clearly landed with people and shifted the narrative, that might have been something where the government was like, because they've left themselves time. It's early enough in March that they would have time for a 6-week campaign. But if he's backing away from it, he's left himself 2 fiscal events between now and an October election. If he's backing away from doing anything bold in this one, I suspect that means he's saving all his gunpowder for that later one, which means we're almost certainly having an autumn election.
Henry, can I be frank? Why don't the Tories just get it? People prioritise migration. We've got uncontrolled mass migration, a city the size of Birmingham every 2 years. We've got an illegal problem with the boats, 50,000 a year, which they still can't sort out. And they just... the government said the other day, it was projected that over the next, I think, 10 years, we're going to have something akin to 400,000 a year legal migration. We are under so much pressure. Public services, we just mentioned there about GP appointments. Migration, some would argue, is the key factor in a lot of this country's problems. Why don't the Tories get that and commit to sorting it out? Because it would be argued that overnight would boost their poll numbers quite significantly.
Well, I mean, illegals, they are trying to do stuff on. The problem is they're running into an issue that you can't really do much more about the illegal situation in our current legal commitments to the ECHR and others.
Just ditch
and
the
they
ECHR.
don't. Well, they don't currently. They don't currently have the. They don't currently. I think all that would happen there is they'd lose the election on that, and then Labour would spend the next 20 years.
Well, they're going to lose it anyway. That's
well,
the
the public have endorsed the ECHR.
And there's too many people, aren't there? Too many MPs in the
Yeah, there's
Tory
no.
party
Leaving,
they don't want to ditch the ECHR.
I mean,
leaving the ECHR is like
they're losing their seats anyway.
Leaving the ECHR is like Brexit. You need to win, but legal's more interesting because legal immigration is astonishingly high. 750,000 people. Yeah, 750,000 people last year. But the problem is that if you want to really bring down, this is what none of the governments have done. If you really want to bring down legal migration, you have to tackle why we have so much of it. Right? That means facing off with big business who want to hire people on the cheap. That means taking on the CBI, big Tory donors. It means potentially letting some universities go to the wall. Now, universities are often ways of basically laundering public subsidies for left-behind towns with no other economy. There are all kinds of problems. And the Treasury knows this. The problem the Conservatives have always had is that they have treated immigration as if it's something that can be solved in isolation. You put the Home Secretary in, they say tough stuff about dealing with immigration, and at the same time, the Treasury, Department for Education and Department for Business continually lobby for higher numbers. If you want to genuinely bring down immigration over the long term, you need to reform higher education, you need to reform industrial training, you need to have the entire government brought onto that. And also, the big one, someone's going to need to pay all of these pensions that we're currently ratcheting up year on year for the next 20 years. Now, if British people aren't having enough kids, and they're not, then you need young workers from somewhere to keep the tax base topped up, right? And unfortunately, many of the same people who complain about high immigration, when you put in proposed measures to make it easier for people to have kids, you get this, people should only have kids they can afford. And frankly, you need young people.
Do you know what long-term for the Conservatives, regardless of what happens this election cycle, long-term for the Conservatives, young people aren't buying houses, people aren't having kids, the birth rate's collapsing, they're going to have nothing to people will have nothing to conserve in generations to come. So not only are they facing, a decade out of power, it could be decades.
Yeah, all of the things that used to make somebody more conservative as they got older, right? Like you acquire a stake in society, you acquire a bit of capital and a place of your own, you start having a family, which changes your outlook on various things. None of these are happening and it's not just, look, some people don't want to do that, and that's absolutely fine, times change. But there are an awful lot of people my age who want to start a family, who want to settle down, but they won't do it because it's too expensive. They're renting, so they don't have that security. And if the Conservatives had delivered for those people, I think there's a huge dividend for a future Conservative Party there that focuses squarely on those voters. But at the moment, the party offers nothing, essentially, to people under 55.
Also, what doesn't help is the party is so divided anyway, with all these different factions, which to voters is not attractive. And in light of this latest drubbing, both by-elections, do you think there will be a resurgence in those people who want to replace Rishi Sunak as leader, even if we are months before a general election?
I think the factions are a real problem, but the factions are basically a fact because Rishi Sunak has not provided any intellectual leadership to the Conservative Party. There's no Sunakism, right? Tory MPs are generally pretty good at following the leader, but there's no project at the heart of this government at the moment. But I don't think people are going to want to replace Rishi Sunak just because if you want to be leader of the Conservative Party, if you're an ambitious Tory MP, you want to take over after the general election. You want to take over, and then you want to win the battle to define that defeat, and you want to be in a position to attack Labour in 2029. You don't want to take over now. Why would you seize the crown when the crowned head is in the guillotine, right? Like, all that would happen is your name goes down in history as the one that suffered what's probably going to be a very heavy defeat. So I think that's actually what's keeping Rishi safe at the moment, is all the really ambitious people who want to be leader are getting ready for an October, November, December Tory leadership contest.
Henry, excuse me for being maybe too simplistic and naive, but isn't it the case that a lot of Tory voters said at the time that by getting rid of Boris Johnson, this scenario was always on the cards? They shouldn't have got rid of Boris, should they? I
mean, Boris Johnson resigned because he suffered a historically high number of resignations and he literally couldn't staff a government. I think that for all that many people are fans of Boris Johnson, and definitely the party has done very badly since, it's important to remember that his poll rating when he left wasn't fixed. Like, it would probably still have gone down. Imagine the COVID inquiry with Boris Johnson still in Downing Street. Imagine how much more hard that would have hit the government. But ultimately, if the Parliamentary Conservative Party wasn't prepared to serve in his government as ministers, That's it. He couldn't have been Prime Minister.
Yeah, and actually, I suppose the argument is that he U-turned on a lot of his original Conservative policies. He went down the net zero path.
He created the immigration policy that's produced record immigration. This is the amazing thing about Boris Johnson. People on the right of the Conservative Party are like, oh, we love Boris, we should never have got rid of Boris. He was high immigration, pro-public spending, brought in the sugar tax. Like, he was basically a way of selling progressivism to Tory voters.
People, and they say it to me, they say, yeah, but he had a personality.
Well, that's fine. I mean, people who like Boris Johnson as a campaigner is absolutely fine, but I am always baffled by people who self-identify as, like, on the right wing of the Tory party, and then they really love Boris Johnson. And I'm just like, did you see what he did in government? Like, he was not a right-wing Prime Minister.
OK. Henry Hill, Deputy Editor of Conservative Home. Always a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Maybe, Pip, maybe we'll see some proper conservatism in the future in the Conservative Party. Who knows?
Don't hold your breath. Still to come, well, everyone's favourite couple, or maybe not, Harry and Meghan, vow they will not be broken after criticism of their royal rebrand. And Prince Harry, he's speaking about his father's cancer diagnosis on Good Morning America later.
This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News. Stay with us.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
The Camilla Tominey Show, Sunday mornings from 9:30.
What you've got to do is, it's a collective. You've got to look like a meteorologist. Nobody out there is necessarily going to be a meteorologist, but what I do on a daily basis is I look globally. I look at what we've got in terms of the track of weather that we've had in the UK. So if you go back a couple of years and we go back to the heat wave of July, August 2022, 40.3 degrees, there's a dot in the landscape, and before then there was other incidents going on. Now that was a huge dot because that was extreme temperatures, and then we, since then, last summer, although we didn't get that kind of record, we saw months with records, various months, May and June and September and October, all-time records. So another dot, and then you're looking again globally. What's going on globally? What's going on in China, in USA, in Africa, now in Australia, for example? Records falling like 9 pins. So when these storms come along, you've got to say, OK, would they have happened anyway? The answer is probably yes. They probably would have done. But when you start getting where we're up to with Jocelyn is number 10, then that's not the record. The record is 11. Named storms, 2015-16. So we've been there before, but only a few years ago. So these things are starting to mount up. And do you know what? On the can of climate change, climatologists, better people than me, people who study this expertly, and they look at it and they say, OK, what we're going to get with extra dimension of heat in the atmosphere, which energy and heat that basically means that you've got more intense storms potentially that can carry more water. What do you get? You get higher wind velocities and you get more water and or snow. We've just gone through a period where parts of this country have been deluged and flooded for the first time.
Yes. I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Britain's Newsroom. It is coming up to 25 minutes past 10. This is Ben Leo and Pip Thompson. Now, we're joined, good morning to you both, former editor of the Daily Star, Dawn Newsome, and political commentator Russell Quirk in the studio. Want to start, actually, and of course we are going to talk about by-election, but just something completely different. And this is the news that Prince Harry has done an interview with Good Morning America, and he has been asked about King Charles's cancer diagnosis, Dawn. We don't quite know what his reply is.
No, we don't.
We're being kept waiting. Suspense is building because this interview's coming out in the next couple of hours. They have run a sort of promo. I don't know whether we have that, whether we can play our viewers and listeners that. But what do you think?
Well, there's a surprise. Prince Harry is going to talk about his family. I mean, what a shock. Knock me down with a feather, Pip. I mean, what else has he got to talk about? No one's interested in Harry or Meghan. It's the only thing he's got to talk about his family. And no wonder King Charles and William try to spend as little time as possible with him, because before you know it, it'll be a new series on Netflix.
Okay, well, we do have that promo. Let's just listen to what we know so far.
Tomorrow morning, a GMA exclusive. Prince Harry, the all-new interview on his life today with Meghan, how his father, the king, is doing, and on his passion supporting wounded warriors. Tomorrow on Good Morning America.
Russell, isn't it the case that Harry rushed over to London for his dad's cancer diagnosis?
For 45 minutes.
He spent a reported 45 minutes with him, and he's now gone back to plug Invictus Games. And you would have thought, before he sat down with Good Morning America, that they would have said, Harry, we're going to ask you about your dad.
Yeah,
so he could have told them, don't ask me.
It's almost as if the only reason that he flew over from America for 45 minutes was because he wanted to be able to talk about the fact that he'd flown over from America for 45 minutes.
When's he going to learn to zip it?
Well, look,
let's be fair about this. We know that he was asked about King Charles's cancer diagnosis. We do not know what he said in response.
And he's not going to give much away.
Said anything.
He's not going to give much away in medical terms, is he? I'm sure. But wouldn't it be nice if he actually says something nice about his family?
Yeah, absolutely. But other members of the royal family have, thanked people for their well wishes. It might be that he says something as.
But we are obsessed, aren't we? I mean, the fact that he is just who he is, and he's being followed around by Good Morning America for several days. Obviously, it's part of the promotion, I think, isn't it, with regard to Invictus Games, which, in fairness to him, he's founded and he's carried on with. But there is a huge dollop of self-promotion here, isn't there? But we are fascinated. We hang on his every word. We want to hear about his life with Meghan, and we want to hear about what he's got to say about his father. I suspect what he's going to say is, I love my father, this is terrible, and I hope he gets through it.
I don't care about his life with Meghan. I really don't care about him or Meghan. The fact that he constantly sells his family, because that's all he's got to talk about.
Have you not had a good look at his website, Dawn?
Pardon?
Have you not had a good look at his website?
I'd rather poke my eyes out.
The new one, is this Sussex.com or whatever it is?
Yeah, where I've been saying this for months and months and months, where they use their Sussex titles, they're now giving them to the kids. And my point is, Russell, Meghan, forgotten her name then, Meghan has gone on for years about how she wanted to kill herself when in the royal family. She was treated miserably. She suffered severe mental health problems. What kind of person would want to keep that connection with someone who treated them so badly? You call them the institution racist, of course.
Well, that kind of person is the person that then uses the royal family to make as much money out of them as she possibly can.
Am I just being cynical?
No. I think you reflect what most people believe Meghan is. This is someone that has looked probably all of her life to be in this situation. She wants to disparage certain things, but to use that disparagement to make money. I wonder if they're being paid for this Good Morning America thing. I mean, I suspect they probably are, aren't they?
Dawn, I've had so many tweets and emails this morning saying, please don't talk about Harry and Meghan.
Exactly.
Please don't get them airtime. But it's the front page of Mail Online, all the top news stories, they're trending on Twitter, so people do want to hear about them, don't they?
Well, I mean, the fact that they're on Good Morning America, which is a highly rated show, I mean, so the fact they're on that, we have to talk about them, but I really would rather not, to be honest with you. I don't care. I want to talk about King Charles and wish him all the very best, and likewise Catherine.
But Dawn, most people now are talking about Harry and Meghan in negative terms. I mean, I saw something the other day that 95% of Americans even now just see them as a bit of a joke, a bit of a parody. So, yes, we're talking about them, but I think 2 or 3 years ago, many people were talking about them quite positively because they were quite interesting and so on. Now I think they're being mocked.
They're very resilient. Sources close to them say that they are not broken and they will carry on doing what they do.
I don't want to break them. I don't want to do anything with them. I don't care. But what I will going to give some balance to this this conversation, because I'm going to say the bobsleigh thing was good. I was jealous of him doing
Harry whizzing down the bobsleigh.
Harry doing the bobsleigh.
60 miles an hour.
I would like to do that.
Something you will care about, Dawn, is GPs and patient waits, because nearly 8 nearly 18 million people are waiting 4 or more weeks to see a GP.
28 days. It's the highest on record and accounted for more than 1 in 20 of almost 348 million appointments that GP teams delivered in 2023. Now, I haven't seen my GP for 3 years, so I think if you've got a 4-week wait, you're doing quite well, to be honest with you.
Why is he avoiding you, Dawn?
Well, it's a she, or I think it was last time I checked. I don't know. But I just can't get to see them, and I live in a particularly poor part of London, so like everybody else that lives around me, what we are doing if we have a minor issue, we are either going to see the chemist, and he's a good mate of the husband's, and he just rolls his eyes at the moment because he's snowed under, he can't cope with the workload, or we go to A&E, and this is a problem. We're burdening A&E when we shouldn't be doing so. We should be able to see our GPs.
Mm-hmm. It's another demonstration, isn't it, of how broken the NHS is. And of course, if we had someone on the left here, they'd now be talking about how we need loads more money. Of course, it's £190 billion is what it costs to fund the NHS. Record funding, by the way, going into the NHS now. Bad organisation is not a symptom of lack of cash.
Russell, you're not allowed to say that. That breaks the rules of,
I know,
of the NHS.
on the pedestal, on the pedestal and so on. How about this?
How about this? Tell us in a moment.
OK,
we need
I'll hold
to get
it.
the news headlines. We must bring them you now because we are late and we're getting told off. So here is Sophia Wensler.
Thanks, Pip. It's 10:31. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB Newsroom. Labour scored a double win in by-elections overnight, inflicting a devastating blow to the Conservative Party. Jen Kitchen snatched Wellingborough with 45.8% of the vote, the second largest by-election swing from Tory to Labour since the Second World War. The stunning results came just 2 hours after Labour's Damien Egan won Kingswood with just under 45%. It was a miserable night for the Tories, with the party now having lost more by-elections in a single parliament than any government since the 1960s. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer welcomed the results, but says the party will continue fighting.
We're very pleased with the by-election results from last night. I think it's very clear that people are crying out for change across the country. They think that the Tories have failed. They can see that most things are broken. They look at the Labour Party and see a changed party. And last night, people who hadn't voted Labour before went out and voted Labour. So I'm very pleased with both of those results. But there is more work to do. There's a long way to go.
Meanwhile, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak says the circumstances facing his party are challenging, but insists Labour doesn't have a plan.
Midterm by-elections are always difficult for incumbent governments, and the circumstances of these by-elections were, of course, particularly challenging. Now, I think if you look at the results, very low turnout, and it shows that we've got work to do to show people that we are delivering on their priorities, and that's what I'm absolutely determined to do, but also shows that there isn't a huge amount of enthusiasm for the alternative in Keir Starmer and the Labour Party, and that's because they don't have a plan. And if you don't have a plan, you can't deliver real change. And when the general election comes, that's the message I'll be making to the country. Stick with our plan, because it is starting to deliver the change that the country wants and needs.
Meanwhile, the Reform UK party saw its best result yet in a by-election, grabbing 13% of the vote in Wellingborough. The party also secured more than 10% of the vote in Kingswood. Reform's Wellingborough candidate Ben Habib hailed the results as remarkable, while party leader Richard Tice told GB News it's proof that its time for the Tories is up. And for the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
For stunning gold and silver coins you'll always value, Rosland Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
And here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2585 and 1.1691 euros. The price of gold is £1,594 and 49 pence per ounce. And the FTSE 100's at 7,653 points.
Rosland Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Lots more still to come, including we're going to hear from the Prime Minister shortly after that bloodbath in the 2 by-elections. Also, Nigel Farage is on standby. But first, in a GB News series, Innovation Britain, we're looking at the success, rather, of British manufacturing around the country.
companies do you know that export 65% of what they make? Andrew, what's the export market been like for you?
This year, it's really held up well. The export market has grown, so we've had nice growth on that point, but also we've had good sustained business on a UK basis as well.
Now, obviously, you've been a UK company for over 40 years. So what's it been like through them years?
Everybody's had their ups and downs, and we're no different. But since the 2008 crash, we're right back up to the same sort of figures, if not more. So we've had certainly really good growth over the last certainly 10 years.
So what's this year been like for you?
Good. We've seen some work certainly coming from the defence side of things with the political situation as it stands at the minute. There's been spending on defence this year, and that will certainly continue into the future.
And obviously we've talked about how much you export. So what work do you actually do and what industries do you work in?
It's all basically petrochemical, refinery, nuclear, with Hinkley Point coming on soon. That's been good for us. There's hopefully going to be Sizewell C coming up, and that should be good for us as well.
Now, just last question, obviously, there's a lot of bad news in UK manufacturing, but how are you finding it as a business owner?
It's been difficult. Certain things have given us some challenges, but I think those challenges are the same the world over. I think, generally UK manufacturing is in a fairly good state.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. Weekdays from midday.
Francis, Just Stop Oil have in the past broken the law. I remember distinctly the Dartford crossing. That ended up with 2 jailed, I believe, if I remember correctly. Is it ever justified in your view?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on. I mean, I would have to say yes. I mean, we're trying to preserve my life, your lives, the lives of your family, and it's not just the planet that we're trying to protect, it's the lives of millions of people. And, we know from history that we have to break the law in order to put pressure on the government and to be listened to.
No one would doubt your sincerity in your views. You genuinely believe in what you fight for. But there are others who think differently. For example, there are Islamist extremists who believe that people will go to hell unless they convert to Islam. They will sincerely, perhaps, break the law in order to force people to convert. In their view, they might be saving people's lives for eternity. There might be abortion activists who say that babies are being murdered and to save their lives we need to break the law to stop people having abortions. Why do you get to say that your moral conviction is the one that's right and other people's individual moral conviction are those that are wrong?
So what's really integral to the Just Stop Oil campaign is the fact that it is a non-violent campaign. That's what separates us from the examples that you've just given. We're absolutely dedicated non-violence, both as a tactic and as a principle. So though we might be breaking the law...
If individuals take it upon themselves to break the law for whatever their course is, surely the way that we decide what society wants in general is democratic and within the law.
Well, of course, we know also that protest is absolutely integral to maintaining and upholding a democracy, and in particular, non-violent protest. I mean, I really can't express to you how severe this situation is, and I'm sure you know this.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Britain's Newsroom with Ben Leo and Pip Thompson. The Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, he has been speaking, giving his first reaction to the double by-election defeat. Let's listen to what he had to say.
Midterm by-elections are always difficult for incumbent governments, and the circumstances of these by-elections were, of course, particularly challenging. Now, I think if you look at the results, very low turnout, and it shows that we've got work to do to show people that we are delivering on their priorities, and that's what I'm absolutely determined to do, but also shows that there isn't a huge amount of enthusiasm for the alternative in Keir Starmer and the Labour Party, and that's because they don't have a plan. And if you don't have a plan, you can't deliver real change. And when the general election comes, that's the message I'll be making to the country. Stick with our plan, because it is starting to deliver the change that the country wants and needs.
Are you more concerned about Reform UK or about Labour?
A vote for anyone who isn't the Conservative candidate, whether that's Reform or anyone else, is just a vote to put Keir Starmer in power. That's the actual choice at the general election between me and him, between the Conservatives and Labour. Now, I believe our plan is working. At the start of this year, we're heading in the right direction. Taxes are coming down, inflation is falling, and if we stick with that plan, we can deliver everyone a brighter future, give them the peace of mind that that is there for them and their families. They can have a renewed sense of pride in our country. And the alternative, as we've seen over the past week, is a Labour Party who don't have a plan, can't tell you what they would do differently, and that means no change.
People think that this government is failing. Isn't it the truth that you're now staring down the barrel of a major general election defeat whenever it arrives?
We've clearly been through a lot over the past couple of years as a country, but I genuinely believe at the start of this year that we're pointing in the right direction. Now, we're not out of the woods yet, but across all the priorities I set out, we are making progress. Inflation has been more than halved. The economy outperformed expectations last year. Debt is on track to fall. We've cut the number of illegal migrants coming by a third, and we're making progress on the longest waiters in the NHS. Now, I know that there's work to do, but if we stick with our plan, I can give everyone the peace of mind that there's a brighter future ahead. And at that general election, the alternative is the Labour Party. Keir Starmer can't tell you what he would do differently, and that's because he doesn't have a plan. And if you don't have a plan, you can't deliver any change.
How can you cut taxes in a recession?
Well, because of our plan to halve inflation, which has been successful over the past year, and because economic conditions have improved, we have already been able to start cutting taxes for people. We've delivered a significant tax cut at the start of this year, cutting the rate of national insurance from 12% to 10%. Now, that means that someone on an average earnings of about £35,000 is seeing a tax cut worth £450 that hit their pay slips in January. Now, that will benefit everyone in work. It demonstrates that our plan is working. And if we stick with that plan, I can give everyone peace of mind that there is a better future for them and their families ahead, and we can all have a renewed sense of pride in the country.
Without Reform in the picture, you might have won one of these by-elections. What lesson has that taught the Conservatives?
Yeah, a vote for anyone who isn't a Conservative candidate, including Reform, is just a vote to put Keir Starmer in power. And that won't deliver any change on the people's priorities because he doesn't have a plan. In contrast, we do have a plan, and that plan is starting to work. Now, of course, we're not out of the woods yet, but we've seen that inflation has been more than halved. The economy outperformed expectation last year. The number of illegal migrants crossing is down by a third. These are people's priorities. We're making progress on them. And if we stick with the plan, then there's a brighter future ahead.
OK, well, you've got to appreciate the optimism. Let's get our political editor, Christopher Hope's reaction to that. He's in Wellingborough. Chris, good morning to you. Sunak's a pleasant guy. He's a nice chap. But it reminds me, that clip there, of Chemical Ali during the Gulf War, Saddam's information minister. Everything's fine. The tanks aren't here. The economy was amazing last year. We beat expectations. What, is he kidding himself, or does he know that the game's up?
Yeah, you mean comical Ali, don't
comical
you?
Ali, sorry. Lots of chemicals.
While Baghdad was exploding behind him, he said we're winning the war. It's not quite that bad, I think, because if you look at the numbers from last night, a lot of Tory supporters, as they have done all last year, sat on their hands. Now, if you can get more Tory voters out, there's a real chance that the Tory party can eat into this rampant Labour Party at the moment at the polls. And the place they're going to, if they are voting, they tend to be going towards the Reform Party, which here in Wellingborough went from 0 to 13%, because of course they didn't fight the last election in 2019 as a Brexit party, and in Kingswood to 10%, again from 0, having not fought it in 2019. billion. So the idea is that stick with the plan. I'm turning the economy around, says Mr Sunak. Stick with me, I'll make the cost of living crisis better for you. Saying that the day after, figures show we are slipping into a recession. I mean, the figures don't really bear up what Mr Sunak is saying, and that's part of the problem. He's fundamentally a decent man. He does believe in tax cuts. He believes in stopping the boats. We saw that at the GB News People's Forum on Monday. The problem is that the mood music is changing in the country, and people, if they're not listening to politics, they're only listening to Labour. They've turned the Tory party down to 0 on the volume knob, and that's part of the problem.
Chris, overall, what can we take away from these by-election defeats then? Is it that the Conservatives are in even more trouble, or is it that Labour are charging even more ahead?
I think it's the same as last year, Pip, in the sense that you've got a Labour Party who are offering, at least talking about change, although if you look at the detail of what they're offering, it's not a lot different to what the Tory party is doing. Earlier we had Pat McFadden on the channel talking about 300,000 homes a year. Well, that's broadly where the Tory party wants to get to. There are about 250,000 at the moment. So a lot of the ambition of the Labour Party isn't that great, or certainly not talked about as great. The GB Energy idea isn't really worked out. The 28 billion was their major plank of spending on green projects. That's been dropped altogether. They're going to do bits of it, but not all of it. In a sense, that the Labour Party is saying we're a different cast of people, but the policies aren't that different themselves. And I think that's all they can offer is a new idea. I'm not sure that's a great prospectus for government, but the voters right now are listening to Labour, not to the Tories, and how they break through that inertia. I've been talking to Reform Party figures here in Wellingborough. They are talking to me privately that there are groups of Tory MPs who may try and come across from the Tory party to reform before the election. Now, I discounted defections, really, but if the Reform Party keeps growing in the polls and starts challenging the Tory party, unbelievably, for second place in the polls, that could become a reality, and then it could become a full-blown crisis for Mr Sunak.
Christopher Hope, our political editor, thank you very much, sir. Up next, this has caused quite a stir, hasn't it? Prince Harry, he's set to discuss his father's cancer diagnosis in public for the first time on American breakfast television. You're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News. Stay with us.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Lee Anderson's Real World, Fridays from 7 p.m.
Dr. Jane Jones, who's the clinical lead for Care After Combat.
Yeah.
Jane, thanks for coming. And just tell me a little bit about your organisation. What do you do?
OK, well, thank you for having me here so we can talk about Care After Combat. So we are an organisation, a charity, who work into the prison system, working with military veterans who've somehow got involved with the justice system and...
So there's quite a high population of ex-servicemen and women in our prisons. Why is that, do you think?
So 2014, the government did a review of who was resident in UK prisons, and what they found were that military veterans are the highest occupational group, and this obviously raises some concerns. Yeah. So the government wanted to do something about that, and so they supported Care After Combat initially, just as a scoping exercise, really, to see if there was any way we could help these men and women actually, understand the problems that led to offending behaviour and go on to lead successful lives.
So what sort of offending behaviour are we talking typically for people that's in prison that's actually served in our armed forces?
Primarily, it's violence.
Yeah.
So that is the highest offence that we work with.
Okay.
But of course, the military, as with everybody else, it's the full range of offending behaviour.
OK, so we're in a pub, Jane, Dr. Jane, and I guess for some people, the odd tip of alcohol is good, a bit of fun of a weekend, relax, let your hair down. But for some people, alcohol is not always their best friend, and I guess that plays a part in some of your veterans that end up inside.
Absolutely. So, speaking from my own experience, a good 2/3 of the people I work with have some kind of mental health problem or mental health difficulty, struggling to either adapt into civilian life or with some of the traumas they've experienced during service. People might self-medicate with alcohol to manage some of those thoughts and feelings.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. The Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning, it's 10 to 11. You're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News with me, Ben Leo, and Pip Thompson.
Prince Harry has ignored advice to behave during a trip to Canada this week as he's taken part in a new bombshell interview on his father's cancer diagnosis.
Let's take a look at the preview to the Good Morning America clip.
Tomorrow morning, a GMA exclusive, Prince Harry, the all-new interview on his life today with Meghan, how his father, the king, is doing, and on his passion, supporting wounded warriors. Tomorrow on Good Morning America.
Joining us now is former royal correspondent at The Sun, Charles Ray. Good morning, Charles. Let's get to it. He spent 40 minutes with his ill father in London. He raced back to America within 24 hours, and he's arguably spent even longer with this film crew from Good Morning America. When's Harry going to learn to keep his mouth shut?
Well, it's very, very interesting, Ben. I mean, I saw that promo that you've just shown, but I can tell you that there's an extra 2 paragraphs of words from Harry in which he says, apparently, look, I love my family. The fact that I was able to get on a plane and go and see him and spend any time with him, I'm grateful for that. And then he's asked if an illness in a family could have a unifying effect. And Harry then says, yeah, I'm sure. Throughout all these families, I see it on a day-to-day basis. The strength of the family unit coming together. I think any illness, any sickness brings families together. Now, I don't know whether this guy is completely living in cloud cuckoo land, but according to one report, when he was over here for the 30 minutes that he saw his father, he made it clear he would not step into a room where his stepmother, Camilla, was. And remember, he completely criticised her, called her a wicked witch in his book Spare. He makes no mention at all, has not made any mention at all, of the abdominal surgery that his sister-in-law has had, which he was one time he was supposed to be very close to. He's made no mention at all about his brother saying, I want to, bury the hatchet or anything like that. It's going to be very interesting when we actually see this full interview. And you're quite right. He spent more time with his camera crew than he has with his father. And it makes you think, I listened to Russell Quirk and Don Neeson earlier on, and it makes you think that the reason he flew over was just so that he could do this Good Morning America interview. He must have known he was going to do it.
Yeah, it will be interesting to see or hear what the reaction from the palace will be, will it not, to this interview, if he has given those sorts of comments.
I doubt very much we'll hear anything from the palace. They'll not want to fuel any row at all. But we're following a pattern now with Harry and Meghan, and that is, I don't want to be part of this family. They're a racist family. They made life hell, mental health issues with Meghan and everything else. Yet they continually want to be linked to them, as we've just seen with their new website.
Could it be, Charles, that Harry might be regretting some of the stuff that he has said and done?
It could be, but he shows no sign of any regret at all of saying anything. You see, he's caught between a rock and a hard place. He's got to support his wife because you know, it's his wife, and you tend to support your wife rather than other members of your family. But what they have done is completely criticise the family, so much so. Fancy calling your own family a racist family. I mean, it's
Charles, we're going to have to cut you short, unfortunately. Thank you for your expertise, appreciated as ever. Harry and Meghan bang on about compassion, but yeah, they went and cavorted with the Jamaican Prime Minister when his father was ill. More to come in the next hour. Nigel Farage is on standby. Stay with us. Now's your weather.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello again, very good day to you. Alex Burkill here with your latest GB News weather forecast. There is some heavy rain on the cards as we go through later tomorrow, but for the time being, it's largely dry. That's because we have a brief ridge of high pressure across the UK. However, a weather system is waiting out to the west of us, and it's this that's going to bring the rain tomorrow. As we go through the rest of today, though, yes, there are a scattering of showers around, particularly across parts of northern England, Wales, Northern Ireland and Scotland, but towards the south here, it's actually looking largely dry, and many of us will see some bright, if not even sunny spells developing. It won't be quite as mild as yesterday, but still temperatures above average for the time of year, highs around 15, possibly even 16 Celsius. Staying mostly dry as we go through this evening and overnight, still a few spots of rain perhaps, but particularly across eastern areas, likely to be a fine picture through the start of Saturday. However, further west, there will be a bit more cloud pushing its way in, and this could bring some drizzly outbreaks of rain too. Temperatures dipping a little bit lower than they have done through some recent nights, but still not particularly chilly. A relatively mild start tomorrow morning. Tomorrow then, some sunshine across eastern areas, otherwise a relatively cloudy day. A few outbreaks of drizzly rain perhaps most likely over higher ground in the west, but it's later on as we go through into the afternoon that we're going to see some heavier, more persistent rain spreading its way in. Still mild, bringing in our air from the south, so temperatures staying above average for the time of year. Bye-bye.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
So the highway code was amended recently. Passed me by, but anyway, a new poll suggests this has made no difference to the safety of road users, and I could believe that.
Yeah, there was an awful crash in London, wasn't there? A bus and a pedestrian yesterday.
Fatality.
So we're asking, is the highway code fit for purpose, or should we just scrap it altogether? That's our debate this morning, and we're joined by Danny Kelly. She argues highways are not fit for purpose, and cycling instructor Anna Hughes thinks they are. Good morning to you both.
You see, Anna, I think it's a good thing. I think the highway code is a good thing. I just don't think that any of us pay any attention to it, or we should all be tested on it quite regularly, I would have thought. We should have revision courses in it.
Yeah, I think you just summed it up, Eamon, by saying the changes passed you by. I actually asked a few of my fellow cyclists and pedestrians, what is classified as vulnerable road users, about this very thing. I said, has the new highway code made things safer for you? And most people said, not at all. Drivers don't know what it is. They don't know what the changes are. They probably don't know what the rules are to start with. And as you've just said, doing refreshers is a really good idea. It's a bit bizarre that we're given a license to operate this quite dangerous machinery, and then we're never tested again, and especially not on the highway code, which is, especially when it changes, why wouldn't we be retested on that or have to do refresher courses on it? You know, there are conflicts on the road, there are fatalities. It makes sense to be aware of what the highway code says, because it is there to keep us safe.
Yeah, and Danny Kelly, when I think back, I think it was 1999 I passed my driving test. Hardly any bikes on the road then, to be honest, probably virtually none.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's Live here on GB News. Every Wednesday we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's Live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Good morning to you. It's 11 a.m. on Friday, February the 16th. This is Britain's Newsroom with me, Ben Leo, and Pip Thompson.
People of Wellingborough have spoken for Britain. This is a stunning victory for the Labour Party and must send a message from Northamptonshire to Downing Street.
The new Labour MP for Wellingborough, Jen Kitchen, celebrating her by-election victory overnight.
But the pain...
that we won the election on our own back by working hard and getting a good message out there to the voters of Kingswood.
There we go. The pain didn't stop there, though, for Rishi Sunak. Newly elected Labour MP Damien Egan also overturned an 11,000 Tory majority to win the by-election in the constituency of Kingswood.
Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has given his reaction.
Midterm by-elections are always difficult for incumbent governments, and the circumstances of these by-elections were, of course, particularly challenging. Now, I think if you look at the results, very low turnout, and it shows that we've got work to do.
Here he is. Sir Keir Starmer praised the results as fantastic.
We're very pleased with the by-election results from last night. I think it's very clear that people are crying out for change across the country. They think that the Tories have failed. They can see that most things are broken.
Morning, a GMA exclusive. Prince Harry, the all-new interview on his life today with Meghan, how his father, the King, is doing, and on his passion supporting wounded warriors. Tomorrow on Good Morning America.
Yep, Prince Harry is set to discuss King Charles's cancer diagnosis later in the US on Good Morning America.
And he's on standby. GB News presenter Nigel Farage threatens to scupper NatWest share sales unless there's a culture change in the wake of his debanking scandal. It comes on the morning that the bank appointed Paul Thwaite as its permanent chief executive. Nigel is with us shortly.
Some interesting lines now coming out of that interview that Prince Harry has done on Good Morning America. He's spoken about cancer diagnoses among all families, bringing them closer together.
Uniting the family.
Yeah, we will be watching. That interview comes out in the next few hours. We've also had lots of thoughts from you about how long it takes to get to a GP appointment. Some of you are waiting at least 4 weeks.
And I mentioned it a bit earlier. I said, what's the link between that and migration? A lot of you went wild in the inbox and on Twitter saying, why is nobody talking about this? Continue to let us know your views on that, on the by-election, on Harry's new interview as well. gbviews@gbnews.com. But first, here's your news with Sophia.
Thanks, Ben. Good morning. It's 2 minutes past 11. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB Newsroom. Your top story this hour. Labour scored a double win in by-elections overnight, inflicting a devastating blow to the Conservative Party. Jen Kitchen snatched Wellingborough with 45.8% of the vote, the second largest by-election swing from Tory to Labour since the Second World War. The stunning result came just 2 hours after Labour's Damien Egan won Kingswood with just under 45%. It was a miserable night for the Tories, with the party now having lost more by-elections in a single parliament than in any government since the 1960s. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer welcomed the results, but says the party will continue fighting.
We're very pleased with the by-election results from last night. I think it's very clear that people are crying out for change across the country. They think that the Tories have failed. They can see that most things are broken. They look at the Labour Party and see a changed party, and last night people who hadn't voted Labour before went out and voted Labour. So I'm very pleased with both of those results. But there is more work to do. There's a long way to go.
Meanwhile, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak says the circumstances facing his party are challenging, but insists Labour doesn't have a plan.
Midterm by-elections are always difficult for incumbent governments, and the circumstances of these by-elections were, of course, particularly challenging. Now, I think if you look at the results, very low turnout, and it shows that we've got work to do to show people that we are delivering on their priorities, and that's what I'm absolutely determined to do, but also shows that there isn't a huge amount of enthusiasm for the alternative in Keir Starmer and the Labour Party, and that's because they don't have a plan. And if you don't have a plan, you can't deliver real change. And when the general election comes, that's the message I'll be making to the country. Stick with our plan, because it is starting to deliver the change that the country wants and needs.
Meanwhile, the Reform UK party saw its best result yet in a by-election, grabbing 13% of the vote in Wellingborough. The party also secured more than 10% of the vote in Kingswood. Reform's Wellingborough candidate, Ben Habib, hailed the results as remarkable, while party leader Richard Tice told GB News it's proof that time is up for the Tories.
It's not our job to help the Tory party. Our job is to put forward different policies that we believe, frankly, will save Britain. I've been predicting the recession that was announced yesterday since the beginning of the year. I was right on that. You can't grow an economy with the burdens of record high taxes, record high wasteful government spending, mass low-skilled immigration and the vast cost of net zero. And I've been saying this, and sadly, I've been proven right. And that's the policies that we're going to put to the people with a completely different plan. And we say this is the only way you can grow the economy and get the country back on track.
But Conservative Party chairman Richard Holden poured cold water on Reform celebrations, saying the party's failure to win more seats was disappointing.
It's quite a disappointing result for Reform. You know, I always remember being back on the by-election campaigns with Reform's predecessor, UKIP, back in the 2010s. You know, when in Rochester or in Clacton, they were getting 45, 50% of the vote in some of these by-elections, with with better turnouts than these ones.
And Labour's new Kingwood MP was quick to blame what he called Rishi's recession for helping to deal a double blow to the Tories. Damien Egan said that 14 years of Conservative government had sucked the hope out of the country. His comments came as official figures show the UK slipped into recession at the end of last year, with the economy shrinking 0.3% in December. And Prince Harry will reportedly discuss his father's health in an interview with a US television today. Promos for the Good Morning America programme suggest the Duke of Sussex will speak about the King's cancer diagnosis with the programme's correspondent Will Reeve. It would be the first time Harry has discussed his father's health publicly. A TV crew has been following the Prince and Meghan Markle as they visit sporting champions in Whistler Village ahead of the Invictus Games next year. And Greece has become the first country with a Christian Orthodox majority to legalise same-sex marriage. Many LGBT campaigners struggled to contain their emotion as they watched the result unfold from the galleries. The changes will also see same-sex couples given adoption rights in a rare show of parliamentary consensus, despite objections from church officials. And for the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now it's back to Pip and Ben.
Right, it's 8 minutes past 11. You're with Ben Leo and Pip Thompson on Britain's Newsroom on GB News. Should we get stuck into some emails, some views?
Yeah, thank you for all of you who have contacted us so far. Rod, good morning. You're saying in the general election, I'm likely to write NOTA, none of the above, on my ballot paper. This all feels like a waste of time. Jackie, hello. The results of the two by-elections show it's time for a change from first past the post to a form of proportional representation. And Roger, voter apathy is the Tories' biggest enemy. Why not use the extra day in our calendar, 29th of Feb, to reward the public with an extra day's bank holiday if 85% of voters turn out to vote in the next general election? Roger, that is a very novel idea. Whether or not it will happen, I think it won't.
I've got one from David here, just very briefly. The subject title is Ben Leo, the NHS is not broken. It works just fine for me in my area. We ring the doctor's clinic any time during the day and we get an appointment. But it's good for you, David. Good stuff. I'm pleased for you. But there's a record waiting list of 7.7 million people and probably growing, I suspect. And also there's an excess deaths crisis. 50,000 odd people died before their time last year. And also, as we've discussed, no one can get a GP appointment within a month. So I beg to differ that the NHS isn't in a bit of trouble.
Well, let's go back to the by-election, because this is what the Prime Minister said a little earlier this morning.
Midterm by-elections are always difficult for incumbent governments, and the circumstances of these by-elections were, of course, particularly challenging. Now, I think if you look at the results, very low turnout, and it shows that we've got work to do to show people that we are delivering on their priorities, and that's what I'm absolutely determined to do, but also shows that there isn't a huge amount of enthusiasm for the alternative in Keir Starmer and the Labour Party, and that's because they don't have a plan. And if you don't have a plan, you can't deliver real change. And when the general election comes, that's the message I'll be making to the country. Stick with our plan, because it is starting to deliver the change that the country wants and needs.
Joining us now is contributing editor for Novara Media, Michael Walker. Michael, are Labour on a charge here? Although I do question what Keir Starmer is saying, because he has admitted last week was bumpy, which we know. It's ended on a great note for them. But he's insisting Labour is a change party, and I don't think everybody is going to believe that with this ongoing investigation.
Well, I mean, I want to, if you don't mind, go briefly back to what Rishi Sunak just said, because I do think it's funny as a defence to say everybody absolutely despises us, but they're not exactly inspired by the other guys. You know, if you're sort of standing up in front of the cameras and that's your record, they hate us, but they don't like them, those guys that much. Now, I would say, you know, I think the last week has got a bit blown out of proportion when it comes to the Labour Party. I think most people, when they go to the polls, are going to care more about the fact that we're in a recession than that 2 MPs got suspended for things they said.
Well, it's not over, though, is it? It's a deepening row. We still don't know. There's a lot of information still to come out about who exactly was at that meeting when
one of the guys who got
comments were made. What I'm saying is it's not over. This is still ongoing. So for Keir Starmer to insist Labour is a change party... he's getting a little ahead of himself.
Well, so I think what Keir Starmer is right about, and I'm not inspired by this Labour leadership. You know, I don't think they're a particularly inspiring party offering a dramatic alternative for the country. But one thing they have successfully done is make people not scared of them, right? And I think that's a real big problem for the Conservatives, because the Conservatives, you know, running up to the next general election, they don't have much to offer people. So what they're going to be trying to do is feeding loads and loads of scare stories to the newspapers about the Labour Party to try and say, you might not like us, but the other guys are even scarier. And Keir Starmer, I think, his strategy of being an incredibly boring man, you know, you might not find him inspiring, but if you don't find him scary, then if you're a Tory, you might just stay at home, right? Because they want to raise the stakes. They want to say, oh, this was a by-election. People like to bash the government in a by-election. But when it comes to a general election, they'll know this is a serious choice and then they'll turn out. Well, given the 2 parties have the same foreign policy, the same fiscal policy, who's going to be particularly scared of a Labour government at this point?
Yeah, I mean, the argument is that it's just the so-called uni party. Both the Tories and Labour are obsessed on net zero, both pro-mass migration. But, Michael, I want to just pick you up, going back to this anti-Semitism row in Labour. You said it's blown out of proportion. You referred to it as just a thing. Really, it's not just a thing, because we still don't know which Labour MPs were in that meeting. And also, what's coming down the line? What's in the closet which is threatening to derail Labour's ambitions for power?
Well, I mean, Graham Jones was the second guy who got suspended. And I think it's important not to just say alleged anti-Semitism, to say what the person actually said, right? Because I think otherwise you end up in a bit of a moral panic situation. Graham Jones said, effing Israel. And he said that people who go and join a foreign army and fight in what the International Court of Justice says a potentially genocidal war should go to prison. Now, neither of those are remotely anti-Semitic. And so I do think we have to be careful here. Let's talk about what people actually said. Now, what the candidate...
Saying neither of those...
Well, what the candidate in Rochdale said, I mean, has tinges of anti-Semitism. Yes, that was a conspiracy theory.
What did he just remind viewers what he said? So
he said that he thought that Netanyahu, to some degree, let October the 7th happen as an excuse to
he says Egypt tips Israel off and they didn't do much about it and let it...
Well, I mean, the element of truth there is that the Israelis did have a bunch of warnings about October the 7th. Now, I think he went further and said they deliberately ignored those warnings so as to have a chance to invade Gaza. I would say they ignored those warnings because they assumed, oh, you know, Gaza, this is quiet now, we can ignore these people. They clearly don't have the capacity to mount that kind of campaign.
The point is, those comments were made in a meeting where we still don't know which other MPs or Labour types were in the meeting. And if that's the case, why didn't those MPs or those candidates for seats in the future raise the alarm? It's not just Azhar Ali's comments that are a concern, it's who was there and who didn't raise the alarm.
Well, this is incredibly hypothetical. Who might have been in that meeting? I don't know. You don't know. Well, is it
haven't
important?
answered the question.
Is it important? I mean, I really don't think that electors are going to go to the polls at the next general election and say, we haven't had, we're in a recession, but we've actually been in a recession for a much longer period of time if you look at the per capita figures. So for over 2 years, we've been in a recession on a per capita basis, which is what matters. That's people's incomes. I don't think anyone's going to go to the polls and say the Tories have trashed the NHS. My income isn't any higher than it was 20 years ago. Oh, but a Labour MP might have been in a room when a Labour MP said something about Israel potentially letting October the 7th happen as a pretence to invade Gaza, when in fact the Israelis kind of let it happen, not intentionally, but by complacency.
Well, could the issue not be,
it's just a bizarre issue.
that Keir Starmer pledged to root out anti-Semitism within the party, and there are signs that he hasn't actually done that now?
I mean, I just think this is not that big a deal. I would also say that I think the reason we're having this...
You don't think anti-Semitism is a big deal?
Well, I don't think someone saying effing Israel is a big deal. I really don't.
Well,
and I think the reason...
Let's focus on Azhar Ali's comments.
I think the reason we are talking about this here now is in part because there is currently what looks to many like a genocidal war going on in Gaza, and this to me just seems like a massive distraction. Obviously, real anti-Semitism exists, but someone who has a bit of a cranky theory about what happened on October the 7th, it's not that big a deal.
There could be a plausible case.
Exactly. That's a big deal. That, to me, is a very big deal.
Right, but that still doesn't excuse anti-Semitism.
Well, no, I mean, he was right. He was right to suspend. He was right to suspend Azhar Ali. I don't think he was right to suspend Graham Jones.
By the way, I condemn Israel's indiscriminate bombing. I hate seeing the numbers, whether they're true or not. One child being bombed or killed by any nation.
They are true. Those numbers are accepted by the Israelis.
Some would argue they're from Hamas and they're questioned.
Some would, but these are all sort of talking points which I think are essentially distractions from what's actually going on the ground.
But Michael, that's a minor point. My point is, regardless of what Israel are doing or how they're behaving, that does not excuse anti-Semitism in the Labour Party, and there's still big questions left as to who's in the meeting, who didn't raise the alarm about Azhar Ali's comments. Keir Starmer has tried to shrug off the connection and his support to Jeremy Corbyn for years and years, and he insists that he's done that. Clearly, he hasn't.
Well, I think he's been incredibly inconsistent on the issue of anti-Semitism. So one thing I'm, somewhat perturbed by, right? He suspended Andy McDonald. Everyone says, oh, alleged anti-Semitic remarks. What Andy McDonald said is everyone living between the river and the sea, Israelis and Palestinians should be able to live in peace and harmony. That is not in any way whatsoever anti-Semitic. So I think Keir Starmer is using the anti-Semitism issue to kick out his factional opponents. And what happened this weekend and why he was in a crisis is because some people who weren't his factional opponents ended up finding themselves subject to accusations of anti-Semitism.
OK, so if we come back to the by-election now, are Labour on a charge towards victory? How much are these by-election results a sign of what's going to happen in a general election?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, by-elections in general, you can't necessarily say, well, if Labour won a by-election, they're going to win the general election. People do vote in different ways.
And the turnout wasn't great.
But Wellingborough was the biggest, or the second biggest swing since the Second World War. So these weren't just ordinary by-elections. The low turnout is interesting. So I think the low turnout, on one level, Rishi Sunak is right. Everyone hates the Conservatives, but they don't love Labour that much, which to me spells it will be a low turnout general election. I can't see what the Tories are going to get out of the bag that suddenly says, oh, these people that aren't turning out for the Tories are going to do it the next time there's a general election.
And just briefly, what's your thoughts on Reform? They performed pretty much in line with their national polling.
Yeah, I mean, I think lots of people thought that was maybe a sort of artefact of polling methods, but clearly there is real support for Reform. I mean, Rishi Sunak's got to make a decision now. I mean, is he going to try and make a deal with Nigel Farage and Richard Tice before the next general election? I think potentially, they were thinking about absorbing those people after the next general election. Do they want to do it beforehand?
Yeah.
Is that the only way you see that the Tories could save themselves?
Well, they can't do it. None of their policies are working. You can't just keep saying Rwanda, Rwanda, Rwanda and hope that people will vote for you.
Yeah.
Okay. Michael Walker, Novara Media, thank you very much for your thoughts this morning. And we must tell you, the candidates standing in the Royal Rochdale by-election are Azhar Ali, Labour. Well, that's on the ballot paper.
No,
but
he is Labour. He can't come off the ballot.
Yeah, but he will be Labour on the ballot paper.
He's
but
just
if
not
he
getting
wins,
the support from
he will be
Labour.
an independent. Mark Coleman, independent. Simon Danchuk, Reform UK. Ian Donaldson, Liberal Democrat, Paul Ellison, Conservative, George Galloway, Workers' Party of Britain, Michael Howarth, Independent, William Howarth, Independent, Guy Otton, Green Party, Ravin Roden, Subordinate, Official Monster Raving Loony, David Tully, Independent.
OK, great stuff. Still to come, there's quite a strange row breaking out in the world of darts. You won't believe what Darren Webster accused his Dutch opponent of.
Here's a clue. There's a very strange or unpleasant smell in here.
Pip spotted this story this morning. She said, this is a great one. And I said,
because it cracked me up, that's why, Ben.
let me give you a clue. It's going to cause a stink.
You're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Patrick Christie's Tonight. Weekdays from 9 p.m.
We have let Islamist extremism into Britain, we've let it fester, and now we've let it win. Our absolutely spineless surrender merchant political top brass are rolling over while government ministers wear stab vests and quit their jobs in fear. Veteran Tory Minister Mike Freer has had death threats from Islamists as well as an alleged arson attack on his office. The motive there has still not been established. He's standing down because he doesn't want to die. I cannot emphasise how important this is. A minister of the government is quitting his job because he doesn't want to be killed by a lunatic jihadi. And our Prime Minister has said absolutely nothing. Nothing. A spokesman for Rishi Sunak said he was saddened. Is that it? Our Prime Minister should have been out on the steps of Downing Street saying that we will not be intimidated. We will not let this continue. Enough is enough. What does he do instead? He tweets about XL bullies. Yeah, fantastic. Where's Keir Starmer on this? Well, he's conducting focus groups on how to get the Muslim vote back, so he's hardly going to come out all guns blazing, is he? Ed Davey? Well, there's no way a Liberal Democrat leader would come out and admit that his ideology has helped turn Britain into a poster nation for multicultural failure. The police have let protesters, which include rabid anti-Semites, rampage around London every flipping Saturday for the last 3 months. And today, they are finally saying that they don't support some of the protests, which in the past have included a now banned terror group and people holding up anti-Jewish signs. They're saying, please don't march down Whitehall. All right, but will you do anything to stop them if they ignore you? I doubt it. I honestly cannot believe that we have sunk to the level where a serving minister stands down because of threats from extremists and our Prime Minister just doesn't feel the need to address it.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 11:22. You're with Ben Leo and Pip Thompson on Britain's Newsroom on
You had
GB
to
News.
think then,
Almost
didn't you?
forgot our names then. I need another coffee, please.
Happens to me all the time at 3 o'clock in the morning. We're joined by former editor of the Daily Star, Dawn Neeson, and political commentator Russell Quirk in the studio. Hello again to you both. Russell, let's talk about British Gas. What's this story then? They've been told to slash their prices.
Well, this is the disparity between wholesale prices, which have dropped significantly over the last year or so, and the fact that that generally hasn't been passed on to the consumer. Now, of course, this doesn't just apply to British Gas. This is petrol companies, electricity companies and so on. It's very interesting when you start to look at the profits of some of these businesses, the fact that those profits have increased significantly because it is alleged, they have not proportionately reduced their costs to the consumer as wholesale prices have dropped. Now, I do wonder where the Competition and Markets Authority are. Now, this is the body that's supposed to have been set up to stop companies taking advantage, shall we say, of consumers.
And even Ofgem. Where's
yes,
Ofgem?
And it seems that, whether it's petrol companies, electricity companies, gas companies, etc., where these savings in wholesale costs have not been passed on. Nobody seems to be saying much about it. But in fairness, the front of the Daily Express is today, and I think this is a particularly big deal because, of course, particularly with water, you, for instance, don't have any choice but to buy your water from one place. So it's an absolute monopoly, and I think this needs to be scrutinised better.
Dawn, I used to work... Oh, sorry, I made you jump. Are you OK?
Sorry you woke me up there. Sorry, what, Ben? Yes, Ben. Yes, I remembered your name.
In yesteryear, when I was a wee lad, I know I still look like a wee lad, but I used to work at an energy company, and their argument for not bringing down prices quick enough is because they buy wholesale in bulk many, many months in advance, and that's their excuse. But when you look at wholesale prices, which dropped from pretty much August last year, from record highs the year before, they've been flat for a long, long time, and yet British people, already cash-strapped, are still paying hundreds and hundreds of pounds a month.
It's profiteering. It's basic profiteering, isn't it? It's happening all the time now. And as you say, Ben, it's ordinary people that are suffering once again. Our bills are going up. We can't afford it. We're not getting any help anymore, are we? So it is basically...
And the bonuses and
the bonuses. It's like the water companies, Pip, isn't it? One job.
But isn't it interesting
take it away.
that when wholesale costs come down, they're very, very slow to reduce them. But as soon as wholesale costs go up, as they did at the beginning of the Ukraine war 2 years ago, immediately those energy companies put prices up.
But Russell, it's like the interest rates, isn't it? It's like, they put your mortgage rate up straight away, but your savings rate takes a little bit longer before you get any of that back.
British Gas's boss, Chris O'Shea, he pocketed a £4.5 million a year bonus or salary package from the company, and he wants the government to set up a social tariff so hard-up consumers pay less for gas and electric. Well, Chris, my friend, just lower your prices. Don't ask the government to do it.
But they don't have to take less bonus, Ben. We can't have that. I mean, how could you get by on less than £4.5 million a year? Come on.
We're struggling, aren't we, Russell? I mean, to be honest with you, I do find it a bit of a struggle, but I'm coping womanfully on this one.
I'm sure, Ben, my friend, that Chris heard you.
I'm sure he did. I wonder what kind of house he lives in, whilst
you won't see it. It'll be behind such high gates, you won't be able to see it.
And also, by the way, let me just say a serious point. Whilst Chris is, pocketing £4.5 million a year, good for you, Chris, the plebs are having their prepay meters installed, their houses broken into, vulnerable customers forced onto meters that have extraordinarily high tariffs compared to, say, direct debit tariffs. So, if you ask me, it stinks.
And on that stinking note,
I saw
let's talk about Dart Fart Gate.
We were debating, Pip, whether we could actually use that word.
We just have.
Well, we just have, yeah.
Apologies if anybody's offended, but I think it's commonly used.
She did. Yeah, so we're talking our bad smells of another link here. This is our darts in a new farting storm. I didn't know there was an old one, to be honest with you. This is two-time World Championship quarter-finalist Darren Webster has accused his Dutch rival, who he lost to. I think there might be sour grapes involved here. Rival of stinking the stage out by going on stage. There you can see a picture of them there. Going on stage and passing wind, basically.
I think he's trying to say, isn't he, Darren Webster, that he was put off. This was actually a purposeful diversion, a distraction technique almost, which sounds like it worked on the basis that he didn't win.
This begs the question: can you fart on cue? We need to know.
Well,
so
dart players evidently so.
If it was a cunning plan to go up there on the oche just to and then have a little, past wind.
I mean, I've never been to a big darts game. I mean, isn't it quite a smelly experience anyway? Because everybody's drinking.
It's one of the sports where it is like literally, it's like a party central. Everyone's dressed up, everyone's drinking pints and pints of beer, and so I should mention there's a lot of gas being generated. So
you're not really selling it, you guys. I must admit, I'm like Pip. I've never been to one, and it's unlikely I ever will. I expect on that basis.
I used to have a dartboard in my bedroom as a kid.
Really? That's a whole different.
Did you?
That's a whole different story.
Did you? Yes. I love it.
Here's a question for you: whose face would be on your dartboard today?
I couldn't possibly comment on that one. You know what? I don't.
Rishi Sunak.
Well, no, not Rishi Sunak. No. I don't know. I really don't know.
Russell?
Yeah, Rishi Sunak. I think he should resign. in days gone by...
He should resign
of course he
at
should.
this stage?
This is, yeah, absolutely.
Seriously?
Yeah, absolutely. So they have to call an election by January, so we've got 11 months. I think there's still time to get a proper Conservative leader in as Prime Minister to turn the fortunes around.
Who's your pick, Russell, for Conservative?
Probably Suella Braverman.
Right.
Would she want to do it, though?
Yes, I think...
If the Tories get trounced...
But they have no chance whatsoever of election.
Would you actually want to... But would you actually want to be the person leading the party into that election?
If I was a Conservative, as I am, a genuine Conservative, and I thought that would enable me to get back to the base, the Conservative vote base, and turn this around so that our Conservative Party and Conservative government actually starts looking and feeling like Conservatives, then yes.
What about reform?
Well, look, reform did fantastically.
The Tories?
Well, I suspect if they won some seats in the general election and they perhaps, if it was a hung parliament even, they could become kingmakers. I mean, that might not be a bad look. Look how well they did. Look how well Ben Habib did in Wellingborough, 13% of the vote. By the way, everyone talking this morning about Labour doing fantastically well. Do you know they hardly got a single vote more yesterday than they did in 2019?
Yeah.
So this whole thing about Labour kind of, absolutely trouncing the Tories, this wasn't a Labour victory. This was a Conservative loss.
People weren't voting for Labour. People were voting against the Conservative Party. But I think the last thing we need now, Russell, is another Prime Minister.
Can we just please, though, mention the Liberal Democrats? I mean, they haven't been mentioned this morning. 4% of the vote.
They haven't been mentioned because they were
Exactly, 4% of the vote. And in both those elections, both Kingswood and Wellingborough, they lost their deposit.
Yeah.
The Liberal Democrats, the so-called third party, I mean, they're gone, they're finished. Well done, Ed Davey, congratulations.
Well, reform of the third party now, but what about the Green Party? Considering green issues are something we're all caring about and we're paying higher bills for, they disappear completely as well.
Yeah.
The other thing interesting to mention, actually, is that it's Kingswood, isn't it, that although Damien Egan, I think it is, won for Labour, that constituency is going to be abolished.
Yes.
And reshaped at the next election.
With the boundary changes, yeah. So it's kind of almost irrelevant. It's a shame it cost so much money to run the election yesterday, then, isn't it?
But the one person it will affect is GBNews Jacob Rees-Mogg, because it will affect his constituency. So where the by-election just been will fall under Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Maybe it means he'll have more time to spend with us and our lovely viewers. Fingers crossed, maybe not in Jacob's opinion. We've got lots more coming up, including Nigel Farage. He's on standby. Don't miss him. He's going to talk about the by-election last night and the latest on his debanking scandal with NatWest. But first, here's your news with Sophia.
Thanks, Ben. It's 11:30. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB Newsroom. First, we bring you some breaking news. Jailed Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny has died. That's according to the prison service of the Yarmalo-Nenets region, where he had been serving his sentence. He was moved to a penal colony more than 1,000 miles northeast of Moscow in December. It's seen as one of the toughest jails in Russia. We will bring you more as we get it. Labour scored a double win in the by-elections overnight, inflicting a devastating blow to the Conservative Party. Jen Kitchen snatched Wellingborough with 45.8% of the vote, the second largest by-election swing from Tory to Labour since the Second World War. The stunning result came just 2 hours after Labour's Damien Egan won Kingswood with just under 45%. It was a miserable night for the Tories, with the party now having lost more by-elections in a single parliament than any government since the 1960s. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer welcomed the results, but says the party will continue fighting.
We're very pleased with the by-election results from last night. I think it's very clear that people are crying out for change across the country. They think that the Tories have failed. They can see that most things are broken. They look at the Labour Party and see a changed party. And last night, people who hadn't voted Labour before went out and voted Labour. So I'm very pleased with both of those results. But there is more work to do. There's a long way to go.
And we can now take you live to Wellingborough, where Labour's Deputy Campaign Coordinator, Ellie Reeves, and winning candidate Jane Kitchen are due to speak.
Also spoke to people who had voted Conservative their entire lives, but were switching their vote to Labour. They told me that they were fed up of 14 years of failing public services, fed up of rule-breaking, sleaze and scandal, and fed up of the mismanagement of the economy that has led to people paying hundreds of pounds more a month in their mortgages, and Rishi's recession, meaning that working people are paying more and getting less. Instead, things will be different under a changed Labour Party. free breakfast clubs in every primary school, 2 million more NHS procedures and appointments, and a publicly owned clean, green GB Energy. The result last night shows that we can win in Wellingborough and seats like Wellingborough up and down the country. But there's no room for complacency. We fought for every vote here, and we will fight for every vote at the general election. And you know, these past few months, it feels like the government have been fighting the general election, one by-election at a time. Well, I say to Rishi Sunak, get on and call a general election. So the public can vote for the change that they desperately need and vote for a changed Labour Party that will rebuild Britain. So Jen, once again, congratulations, and I can't wait to see you in Parliament on Monday.
Well, I'm delighted to stand here as the newly elected MP for Wellingborough. It still hasn't quite...
Welcome back to Britain's Newsroom on GB News. We want to bring you Nigel Farage very shortly. We are going to be speaking to him, but we are getting this breaking news coming that the jailed Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny is dead. Now, that is coming from the prison service in the area where he's been serving his sentence. Now, he is a fierce critic of Vladimir Putin. He was last seen in January last month when he was moved to a Russian penal colony in the Arctic Circle. He was seen in court via video link. But that is the news that we are getting. Reuters is reporting this, and the Kremlin is saying we have no information on the cause of death of Navalny, which indicates that it has been confirmed. The Kremlin says they're making all the checks regarding his death. We are going to be bringing you more on that breaking news very shortly. Stay with us.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together. For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
Welcome to the show. Superb stuff, great footage. So you're right in the thick of it there. What's the mood on the ground?
Well, I've left there now. I've actually now come to that EU Council summit that I was talking about. It's still pretty chaotic. The entire city of Brussels has been completely clogged with these tractors, sort of three abreast in most of the roads across the city. The people of Brussels aren't particularly happy. I mean, this is sort of reminiscent for some people of the Just Stop Oil protests, you know, people gluing themselves. People are unable to get to hospital appointments, and there's a lot of upset about the destruction that's happening on the streets of Brussels today. But on the other side, there's also the protests, which the farmers are saying that EU green laws simply are not able to fit with what they need to do to keep their businesses going. And just before the protests happened, we saw the European Commission actually make some concessions to the farmers' protests. And this is on the demands that were put on them to set aside somewhere in the region of 5% of their land for regrowing for biodiversity. A lot of the farmers have said that's not possible, and the European Commission has said that they can delay that coming in. So they have won a small concession with these protests.
And Jack, there's a feeling as well, a huge dissatisfaction that the European Union has managed to find 50 billion euros in aid to send to Ukraine, and yet farmers in particular are on the receiving end of net zero targets, taxation on diesel, and endless red tape. So many farmers, Jack, saying they're measuring ditches to see if they have to drain them or not. There are minimum requirements on the width of battery hen enclosures. Endless red tape, as Jeremy Clarkson pointed out in Clarkson's farm in Britain. They've simply had enough, and they're shouting, Ursula von der Leyen, we are here.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
Affects us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the last few moments, we brought you some breaking news that the jailed Russian opposition politician Alexei Navalny has died in prison. That's coming from the country's prison service. Charlie Peters is with us. Charlie, already there's going to be speculation about his death, isn't there? Who could be behind it? He was in prison in the Arctic Circle, serving a jail sentence of nearly 20 years, and he's been a huge critic of Vladimir Putin.
And he was only moved to this prison on Christmas Day, just under 2 months ago. At this penal colony, no information has been released about the cause of his death, but we have heard from the Russian prison service today, this morning, confirming the death of Alexei Navalny. Since a conviction in 2014, he's been in and out of prison in Russia since that time. The lead opposition leader to the reign of President Vladimir Putin. He was poisoned in 2020 and went to Berlin for emergency treatment. It's understood that that poisoning was the nerve agent Novichok, which, of course, we've seen deployed on the streets of Britain by FSB agents. FSB, the heirs of the Kremlin, the follow to the KGB in Russia. They were also implicated in the poisoning of Navalny in Germany. When he returned from Germany in January 2021, he was, of course, then imprisoned once more, and he's been stuck in that system ever since.
There is some, sorry, Ben, just some extra information that's coming out from the Federal Penitentiary Service for Yamal, I think it is. And they are saying in a statement that Navalny felt ill after a walk and almost immediately losing consciousness. Medical workers arrived immediately, ambulance teams were called, resuscitation measures were carried out. Ambulance doctors say the causes of death, still to be established. So we know who he is dead, but he is somebody who was not likely to get released during Putin's lifetime.
No, it was either his life or the political career of Vladimir Putin, as he once put it. And since 2011, his life has really been in a state of grave concern, ever since he led with calling United Russia the party of Vladimir Putin as a party of crooks and thieves. That attention was then, of course, focused by that poisoning in 2020 with that medical care delivered in Berlin. Concerns for his life and his safety have been continuous throughout his opposition to the Putin regime. And those attentions will, of course, be redrawn now, especially with this information we're hearing in the last few moments that he felt ill, that this was a concern of his personal health before resuscitation measures were carried out. Of course, we'll wait for further information from the prison service as we continue our coverage.
Great stuff. Charlie Peters, thanks very much. Let's get more on this now from GB News presenter Nigel Farage, who is with us on standby. Nigel, good morning. We'll get to your NatWest story in a second and also your reaction to last night's Tory bloodbath in the by-elections. But first of all, this story in Russia comes pretty much days after Tucker Carlson's incredible interview with Vladimir Putin, where his argument, Tucker, was that Russia just wants peace and, you know, they're trying to behave like a normal state. What does this do for the optics of Vladimir Putin and Russia?
Well, it's appalling, but it's unsurprising. You know, all the reports about conditions in this penal colony, the way people were being treated, you know, hosed down with water in freezing conditions, etc. So it's not a big surprise. It's dreadful. And you mentioned Tucker Carlson. Now, Tucker's a friend of mine, but I have to say, not even to ask a question about Navalny was, I think, the biggest failing of his interview. And I thought that at the time. Now it looked like very, very poor judgment on Tucker's. That question had to be asked if there are elections coming up in Russia.
I mean, to Tucker's credit, he did ask about the jailed American journalist, and he asked for his to take him home, in fact. But Putin, interestingly, in the last couple of days, has come out and said, I was surprised at how soft Tucker Carlson was. He didn't ask me any challenging questions, and he pretty much criticised him for being such a soft touch.
Yeah, I mean, look, you know, he did ask about the jailed journalist, to which Putin, of course, had a very strong answer, which is we caught him red-handed, passing over it. So you can believe that. You can disbelieve that, but not to have asked about the state of democracy in Russia, not to have asked about Navalny, was a major failing of the interview. And now, in the light of what's happened today, it does look like Tucker failed, frankly.
Yeah. OK, should we speak to you, Nigel, about your latest NatWest scandal? Of course, you were debanked for wrongthink, for holding the incorrect thoughts according to the establishment. You uncovered subject access requests that, well, for example, the troves of their staff called you an awful human being. They criticised the fact that you were an engineer of Brexit. What's the latest now? You're calling for this proposed sale of NatWest shares in the summer to be halted before they properly change their culture. Can you just explain more about what you want from NatWest and Jeremy Hunt?
Well, absolutely. I mean, look, we've had the NatWest profits this morning, and they're very good figures. That's not surprising, given the gap between rates you can borrow and lend with the bank and the fact that rates are higher. They have announced a permanent CEO, Forthwaite, who is an insider and a professional, and that is, of course, an appointment. And I cannot see any evidence that there's been a culture change within the bank of any kind at all. It's as if, let's put the Nigel Farage behind us. Let's give out £350 billion in bonuses to the very people that those subject access requests through didn't just say horrible things about me, but actually threaten violence. You know, they'd like to push me out of a moving car. I mean, it was truly appalling. And the idea that now, in June, NatWest shares will be sold to millions of people, rather like the great privatisation going back to the 1980s. Well, given that actually many of those people who might buy shares will have political opinions and social opinions very, very similar to mine, I think it would be wrong, almost fraudulent, to sell shares to people who they hold in contempt. So I want to see two things. Number one, a promise that the culture at the bank has changed and that people will not be unfairly debanked. And believe you me, there are plenty of us. Number two, an admission that the Travers Smith report, the so-called inquiry, was a complete whitewash of acknowledgement that actually was not looking for the right things. And number three, you know, I racked up huge legal bills through the course of all of this, suffered reputational damage as a result of what was said, and they should settle with me as well. If they don't do those things, I will lodge papers in the court and will have this out sometime over the course of the next few months. And that would mean it's almost impossible for this sale to go ahead. Now, Jeremy Hunt wants this sale to go ahead. He wants this to be a big moment of his chancellorship, and it's something he's going to announce, I think, formally in the budget on the 6th of March. So, NatWest, settle your debts with me and come clean with the British public. Has your culture changed or hasn't?
And Nigel, in one very, very short sentence, your reaction to those two by-elections overnight. Are Reform a big player now at the general election?
Last night, Reform UK came of age. Up until that point, they'd struggled to mobilise in by-elections. We got a couple of scores there, the average of which is above our national vote share. The party is now on the up. It's gaining presence, it's gaining recognition. I think Reform are very pleased indeed.
Nigel Farage, very much appreciate your attendance with us this morning. Thank you so much for your expertise, as always.
Stay with us. Still much more to come, including that interview that Prince Harry has done to Good Morning America. Speak to you again very shortly.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's Live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's Live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Farage, Monday to Thursday from 7 p.m.
Lots of people have different ideas, but principally a conservative approach to getting growth is to reduce taxes so that people, ordinary people and businesses can spend more of their own money to invest and grow the economy.
So the theory is that you cut taxes and that then pumps more money into the economy.
Exactly right. And then people, it's not government that are creating wealth. It's individuals, businessmen, companies that create wealth. It's the private sector that creates wealth, that the public sector then taxes and spends.
I get the theory, but one of the criticisms of you, and I think one of the criticisms actually of all political parties, is they appear to be incapable of cutting government spending.
That's the key. I mean, and I think when I look back, is that we should have had a credible plan to reduce the increase in spending. Now, that's often a difficult concept to explain,
but it's in line with inflation, etc.
That's all right. So when you're slowing the increase, it means 1 year you spend £100, and the next year you spend maybe £101, as opposed to going up to £110. So the actual level isn't going down, but you're slowing the increase, and that's very much what I tried to do. And actually, looking back, the one thing I wish I'd done, was to present a credible spending plan at the same time as the tax cuts that we announced.
You had a go, it didn't work out for whatever reason, and that analysis will go on for some years to come. We have Jeremy Hunt there as Chancellor now, hinting quite strongly now there won't be any tax cuts, but the truth of it is, under 14 years of Conservatives, for a variety of reasons, the tax burden has risen.
That's right.
To the highest since the Attlee government, way back in
80 years,
1951, whatever it is.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together. For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Welcome back. Prince Harry has opened up about his father, King Charles's cancer diagnosis in an interview on American television. This is the teaser trailer.
Tomorrow morning, a GMA exclusive. Prince Harry, the all-new interview on his life today with Meghan, how his father, the king, is doing, and on his passion, supporting wounded warriors. Tomorrow on Good Morning America.
Well, that's caused a stir, hasn't it, this morning? Let's get some more from royal broadcaster Rafe Hedale-Mankou. Rafe, let's be frank here. He spent 40 minutes reportedly with his cancer-stricken father in London. He went back within 24 hours to California, and seemingly he spent hours and hours, much longer than he did with his dad, the King, with American breakfast TV. Shouldn't he learn to zip it?
Yes, well, look, one of the reasons Prince William doesn't want to meet with his brother and didn't meet with him on his recent trip to the UK is quite simply because he doesn't trust Harry. Prince William has always been fearful that any private conversations will be made public in a book or a TV interview, as has happened in the past with his book Spare or the Oprah interview or Netflix documentary. And the fact that Harry's now going to appear on television days, as you say, after meeting with the King, I think might make Prince William think that he was right to be cautious. Now, we have to say, of course, we don't yet know what Prince Harry is going to say. It may actually be that he doesn't reveal anything.
Actually, Rafe, sorry to jump in, but we are getting some lines about what he said, which includes that he hopes the cancer diagnosis can heal his rift with the royals. He says he loves his family and he was grateful to get on a plane and go and see him and spend any time with him.
Well, that's actually good and encouraging, isn't it? Because no one actually wants a family to be constantly at loggerheads. We know full well that the King has hoped that Prince Harry would prove to be a prodigal son, and for that very reason, he's always kept a door open to him. And so if there is an opportunity for that, that's great. At least between father and son, the chances of any healing of the rift between the two brothers is, I think, something which is impossible to see happening, definitely in the short to medium term, perhaps even the long term. Now, I don't know what else is being said in this discussion, in this interview. I would hope that he's limited his comments to the words that we have just heard you say, because we have to remember, this is a discussion about another person's public health. And Prince Harry wants everyone to respect his privacy. And so I hope that in this interview, he is actually going further to respecting his father's privacy too. You know, Prince William has also spoken about his father's condition, but in a very limited context. All he said was that he expresses his gratitude to the public for their messages of support for his wife, who's also undergone surgery, and for his father. So I would very much hope that that's the model that Prince Harry has chosen to also follow in this interview.
Rafe, do you reckon that his father or the palace knew about this interview? And what do you think their reaction will be?
Well, I mean, going by past precedents, I wouldn't be certain that they know about it at all. They may well have learnt about this from the same ways that we've learnt about it. But certainly, you know, you would hope that there was at least some indication from Harry of seeking permission to speak about his father's health in this way.
Well, it's like the famous South Park episode of Harry and Meghan a few months ago saying, we want privacy, but yet they're happy to spill the beans about their family at any opportunity. Rafe, Haydel Manku, thank you so much for joining us.
But maybe, just maybe, saying, I love my family, grateful to have spent time with my father, it might go one step towards healing. Who knows? But thank you for your company. It's been a busy one, hasn't it? You have been with Britain's Newsroom. It is, of course, back next week. But up next is Good Morning Britain. Have a great weekend.
Thank you very much. Yes, it's just me today after Tom Harwood's very long election show overnight. But as we've just heard, the most vocal and persistent critic of Vladimir Putin has been declared dead in prison. What does this mean for the state of democracy in Russia and, of course, for the rest of us and, crucially, Ukraine too? And also, we will be reflecting as well on Prince Harry's interview with Good Morning America. What exactly did he say and what does it mean for the royal family?
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello again, very good day to you. Alex Burkill here with your latest GB News weather forecast. There is some heavy rain on the cards as we go through later tomorrow, but for the time being, it's largely dry. That's because we have a brief ridge of high pressure across the UK. However, a weather system is waiting out to the west of us, and it's this that's going to bring the rain tomorrow. As we go through the rest of today, though, yes, there are a scattering of showers around, particularly across parts of northern England, Wales, Northern Ireland and Scotland, but towards the south here, it's actually looking largely dry, and many of us will see some bright, if not even sunny spells developing. It won't be quite as mild as yesterday, but still temperatures above average for the time of year, highs around 15, possibly even 16 Celsius. Staying mostly dry as we go through this evening and overnight, still a few spots of rain perhaps, but particularly across eastern areas, likely to be a fine picture through the start of Saturday. However, further west, there will be a bit more cloud pushing its way in, and this could bring some drizzly outbreaks of rain too. Temperatures dipping a little bit lower than they have done through some recent nights, but still not particularly chilly. A relatively mild start tomorrow morning. Tomorrow then, some sunshine across eastern areas, otherwise a relatively cloudy day. A few outbreaks of drizzly rain perhaps most likely over higher ground in the west, but it's later on as we go through into the afternoon that we're going to see some heavier, more persistent rain spreading its way in. Still mild, bringing in our air from the south, so temperatures staying above average for the time of year. Bye-bye.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Britain. Britain's Newsroom, weekday mornings from 9:30.
When you listen to Nigel Farage's assessment there, do you feel that maybe this is as good as it was going to get, given that we had the pandemic and it was inevitably always going to be a bit of a mixed bag?
Well, I think it's a bit of a poor excuse from Nigel there that they haven't done it properly. The facts are, Nigel, that it's not worked. It's not going to work. Yes, we will rejoin. I mean, are we better off for it? Are they...
Can I jump in there, Charlie? We're going to rejoin under which government? Because Labour aren't going to do that, unless you don't think...
But I mean, it's going to be unavoidable not to join, because I think it's getting worse and worse for us. I mean, let me just say this. Are the NHS better because we're out of Europe? No, they're not, because they're not employing more staff. Is the building trade better off? No. Is travelling abroad or to the EU or staying in the EU, are we better off? No. Are we better off because foods rise because of the EU? No. Are we better off with imports and export? No, because they're taking